Chapter 1087. Yi Di then turned and smiled at Bu Luqing. Elder Bu, I shall take my leave. The world is long. I'm sure we'll meet again. Bu Luqing said impatiently. Get lost. Hold on. Chu Yang got up slowly and asked solemnly. Who killed Ling Hanwu? Step forward and let me take a look. An old man in black snorted and took a step forward proudly. He said dispassionately, It's me. My name is Yisei. Why, do you want to avenge him? Chu Yang looked at him dispassionately and said slowly, Yisei. Not bad, not bad. Who hurt my master and mistress? It's also me. Yisei sneered. A clown who can't even withstand a single blow. He can't even take a palm strike with just 10% of my power. How can he even talk about taking revenge personally? This person's mouth stinks, Chu Yang said dispassionately. His mouth stinks, I'll wash it for him. Bu Luqing snorted and suddenly moved. The next moment, with a few slaps, that guy had already been slapped more than a dozen times and rolled out. Blood flowed from the corners of his mouth. I won't kill anyone today, Chu Yang said. Yisei, you're my masters. Live well, don't die too early. That will be very disappointing. Yisei lay on the ground with his hair disheveled. He glared at Chu Yang fiercely. Mengyin? Kill me? Chu Yang, you're dreaming. Whether it's a dream or not, you'll know in the future, Chu Yang said dispassionately. But you must take care. You must take care of yourself. Let's go. Yi Di snorted, and a ball of dense night fog swayed twice before suddenly disappearing. The Yi clan members retreated like the tide. You really shouldn't have promised your master to take revenge personally. Bu Luqing walked to Chu Yang's side, shaking his head and sighing. When will that be? Chu Yang said dispassionately. Since my master said to take revenge personally, then he will definitely do it. I will do whatever it takes to help him fulfill his wish. I also want to borrow Elder Bu's power to kill all these people. But that way, I won't feel anything. If I don't take revenge personally, I'll always feel lacking. Chu Yang said softly. Revenge must be taken with one's own hands. Hatred must be repaid in person. A man in this world will repay kindness and enmity as he pleases. Bu Luqing sighed. If everyone wants to take revenge with their own hands, taking revenge with one's own hands requires ability. Chu Yang said quietly. My teacher has this ability. His eyes seemed to be burning with a crazy flame. There was a sentence engraved in his heart. Even if he doesn't have it, I will make him have it. From today onwards, he would not rest until he was dead. Bu Luqing was dumbfounded and said, Let's go back. Chu Yang didn't say a word. He bent down and picked up Ling Hanwu's body. Yi Shiyu led a group of people to send Meng Chaoran and Yi Chuchen back to Chu Yang's orchard palace. Along the way, Yi Shiyu didn't say a word. When they arrived at the orchard palace, Yi Shiyu put down the person. When Yi Shiyu bade farewell, he looked at Chu Yang as if he wanted to say something. But Chu Yang didn't look at him. Yi Shiyu finally let out a long sigh and turned to leave. Although we have some sympathy for each other, and although my aunt is here, we are still enemies. After today, they would not rest until one of them was dead. Anything he said would be superfluous. Chu Yang was busy tending to Meng Chaoran and Yi Chuchen's bodies. Meng Chaoran's spine was broken. Both his legs were fractured. His knees were shattered, and 4 of his ribs were broken. One of them seemed to have pierced into his internal organs, and his internal organs were ruptured. The most serious thing was that his head had been hit by the force of the supreme martial artist's palm. Although it had only brushed past him diagonally, Meng Chaoran's head was severely injured. He was almost left with half a breath. If it wasn't for the incomplete version of the heavy pill, he would have been dead by now. Yi Chuchen, who was at the side, was even more seriously injured than Meng Chaoran because she tried her best to block the palm force for him. Ling Hanwu's body was placed quietly in the hall of the orchard palace. Zi Xiecheng, Moon Breeze and the rest were shocked when they returned. No one expected such a tragic incident to happen in the short time they were out. It was only in the middle of the night that Meng Chaoran regained some consciousness and opened his eyes. Hanwu? Meng Chaoran rolled his eyes. Chu Yang didn't answer and turned his head away. Chu, Meng Chaoran asked in a low voice. She's still unconscious. Chu Yang comforted him. She'll be fine, I promise. Tears flowed out of Meng Chaoran's eyes. He looked at the sky above his head in a daze, and heaved a long sigh. Let me avenge him with my own hands. This is Han Wu's last request in his life. Meng Chaoran said weakly. Those people are mine. They're yours. Chu Yang nodded and comforted him softly. But they're here to deal with you this time. Meng Chaoran looked at Chu Yang. You have to be careful. Chu Yang's expression was heavy as he nodded slowly. They're really here to deal with me. I'm so sleepy I'm going to take a nap. A familiar carefree smile appeared at the corners of Meng Chaoran's lips again. He smiled lightly. In my dream, I'll go drinking with Han Wu. Chu Yang's heart ached. Meng Chaoran had already fallen into a deep sleep. The next day, someone from the Ling clan came to take away Ling Hanwu's body. It was said that Ling Fengyun and Yi Di had a huge quarrel, and almost came to blows. The two of them parted on bad terms. The person who came was Ling Hanxue. Ling Hanxue's eyes were red. It was obvious that Ling Hanwu's death was a huge blow to her. Before she left, she looked at Chu Yang and said, Second uncle left just like that. Although he died for the love of his life, the root of his death was with you. Second uncle had lived a tiring life all these years. His death can be considered a relief. Although the living can't bear it, he can be relieved after all. So let me remind you once more. Be careful at the medicine banquet in Tianji City. Ling Hanxue said softly. Chu Yang was silent. He said, Thank you. I'll bring second uncle back today. Tomorrow morning, I'll bring a few people and bring his body back to Lingxiao City. We'll meet again in the distant future. Take care of yourself. From now on, the big clans in Chu Yang will never rest until one of us is dead. If we meet on the battlefield in the future, and you can kill me, don't show mercy. After Ling Hanxue finished speaking, she led her people out. When she reached the door, she suddenly stopped and said, Second uncle's sword is called Solo Dance in the Cold Sky. Second uncle said that Ling Shue's solo dance in the cold sky was destined to be lonely for the rest of his life. She paused for a moment and said, Tell your teacher to cherish this sword. Ling Hanxue left. She brought Ling Hanwu's body with her. Meng Chaoran was a little reluctant, but Ling Hanwu was after all a member of the Ling clan. Being buried in the ancestral grave of the Ling clan could also be considered as returning to his roots. He could only watch helplessly as Ling Hanxue brought Ling Hanwu away. He let out a long sigh. Hanwu, from now on, drinking with brothers is only a dream. 3 days later, Meng Chaoran was already able to sit up. However, Yi Chuchen was still unconscious. Chu Yang also felt that this was strange. Under the effects of the incomplete version of the heavy pill, her injuries shouldn't be life-threatening. She shouldn't be in such a coma either. How could this be? Zi Xieching solved this problem. She subconsciously thought that she was already dead. Moreover, she had died with her lover and good friend. This kind of death was something that Yi Chuchen was willing to accept. She could feel that she had died in bliss. Therefore, although her body was fine, her consciousness had entered a state of suspended animation. No one knew how long this state could be maintained, but as long as she didn't realize that she was actually still alive, she would never wake up. Zi Xieching and Chu Yang were both helpless in this situation. Meng Chaoran, on the other hand, was very open-minded. It's all right. With me by her side to take care of her, nothing will happen to her. There will be a day when she wakes up. If she wakes up now, she will have to accept the cruel reality. This may also be a good thing. You guys go about your business. Leave her to me. Even if she doesn't wake up for the rest of her life, we are still together after all. Meng Chaoran looked at Yi Chuchen lying quietly beside him, his eyes full of tenderness. Zi Xieching and Chu Yang were silent. Both Zi Xieching and Chu Yang didn't understand this relationship very well, because it was too complicated. The two of them were childhood sweethearts. Yi Chuchen's clan annihilated Meng Chaoran's clan. The two of them fell in love with each other. Ling Hanwu waited with infatuation. When Yi Chuchen was on the verge of death, she let go of all her scruples and married Meng Chaoran. Ling Hanwu died. Yi Chuchen fell into a coma. Meng Chaoran mourned the dead and took care of the injured. Firstly, it was for revenge, and secondly, it was for deep love. Did Yi Chuchen have a knot in her heart after she woke up? What was Meng Chaoran thinking now? Even with Chu Yang's exquisite mind, He couldn't fathom all of this. It was complicated like silk that had been stirred up. There were thousands of threads. On the 5th day, Meng Chaoran was already able to get up and move around. He took care of Yi Chuchen 3 meals a day. As for the rest of the time, he began to cultivate and recuperate. What was surprising was that although he had the support of Chu Yang's countless elixirs, Meng Chaoran's cultivation progress still made Zi Xiecheng feel deeply shocked. It wasn't just because Meng Chaoran was rushing up step by step. If that was all, it wouldn't be much. The key was that when Meng Chaoran took care of Yi Chuchen, he took care of her. When he cultivated, he cultivated. When he took care of Yi Chuchen, it seemed like there was only Yi Chuchen left in his world. But when he cultivated, there was only cultivation in the whole world. His mind was completely focused, without any distractions. Once he cultivated, it was the deepest level of spiritual cultivation. He definitely didn't pay any attention to other aspects. There were only 4 things in a day: taking care of Yi Chuchen, cultivating, eating, and taking an hour out of every night to drink alone with Ling Hanwu's cup, as if they were brothers drinking together. One was in the world of the living, the other was in the netherworld. After drinking a cup, he would pour a cup of wine from the cup opposite him onto the ground. Meng Chaoran actually drank until his spirit soared, and he was in high spirits. Sometimes he would slap his thigh and laugh heartily as he drank, and sometimes he would drink sadly and silently shed tears. As usual, he was cool and unrestrained. And as usual, he was indifferent. Just like good friends meeting in real life, drinking and talking, and pouring out their hearts. Confiding in each other, they talked about everything. Just like how Chu Yang didn't expect that Meng Chaoran's habit of drinking with the illusory Ling Hanwu every night would actually continue for his entire life. Until the end of his life, he still drank with Ling Hanwu and said, "Brother, I'm coming. Come and fetch me." Only then could he rest in peace. At that time, who knew how many tens of thousands of years had passed? At this point, he suddenly thought of a story. There was an old Red Army veteran who returned home after the founding of the country. Every night, he would set a cup of wine and drink with his comrades who had sacrificed themselves. This habit continued until he became seriously ill and couldn't move. Before he died, he said, "I'm the only one left in the company. I have to go." There was also a soldier who gave up all his privileges after the war and became a gravekeeper for his comrades in the cemetery of martyrs. There were many, many more such true stories could be found everywhere in the country. There were really many of them. Chapter 1088. A few days later, Meng Chaoran started to look for Zi Xiecheng to discuss something. Zi Xiecheng was very confused about his intentions. But after hearing what he said, Zi Xiecheng was deeply moved and almost lost her composure. Meng Chaoran created a mental cultivation technique by himself. He felt that it was effective because Zi Xiecheng's cultivation was the highest here, and she was the most knowledgeable. He came to discuss with Zi Xiecheng to improve it. After all, before getting confirmation, Meng Chaoran did not dare to impart such a technique that he himself was not sure of to his disciple. Meng Chaoran had gone through a lot. His mind was calm, and his personality was indifferent. He did not care about anything in the world. All these years, he felt that his body was restrained, and he always wanted to break through the shackles. But he could not do it. Finally, after Chu Yang cured him, he went to the upper 3 heavens. He tried day and night, and finally succeeded in creating a mental cultivation technique. It was only recently that it was finally perfected. Meng Chaoran called this technique Tianyi Divine Technique. And this was also the biggest reason why Meng Chaoran's cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. This cultivation technique could not increase one's cultivation, but it could make one's mind focus. When doing something, one would only think about that one thing wholeheartedly. As for other things, it would be removed from one's mind. This was not only cultivating one's heart, but also one's spirit. Zi Xiecheng was shocked, because after trying it out, she felt that although this technique had some flaws, it was definitely feasible. Completely focusing one's mind on cultivation was equivalent to entering the profound level of meditative reflection. From the start of cultivation, the start was the deepest level of cultivation. So, how could it not be efficient? This kind of technique was not available even in the heavenly imperial court. It could not cultivate one's heart, spirit or body, but one's heart could be free of worries. For battles, this was the most useless mental cultivation technique. But for cultivation, it was the most powerful and invincible technique. It was actually created by someone who had not even reached the martial saint level. This made Zi Xueqing feel like she was in a dream. This kind of mental cultivation technique was definitely useful for people like Zi Xueqing, or even people who were at a higher level than her. It was extremely useful, unless one had reached the level of a great saint, who could change the heavens and the earth. For example, someone who could fold the heavens, they might not necessarily have a use for it. However, even at that level, there would be times when they would need it. Zi Xueqing realized that it was feasible. She immediately used her vast knowledge of martial arts, almost without sleep or rest, to perfectly master this mental cultivation method within a few days. Pass it on to them. Meng Chaoran smiled faintly at Zi Xueqing and said, "My cultivation is too low. I'm afraid they won't take a liking to it, but if you impart it to them, there won't be a problem." After he finished speaking, Meng Chaoran smiled and walked out confidently. He continued to look after Yi Chuchen, and went to cultivate. Even Zi Xueqing was stunned for a long time by this kind of indifference that was beyond chic. Chu Yang's teacher was truly a genius, but he was also an out-and-out eccentric. However, after Meng Chaoran left, he threw this problem to Zi Xueqing. Who should he teach such a cultivation method to? In Zi Xueqing's opinion, this set of cultivation method was the best in the world, because there was no other set of cultivation method that could be applied to anyone like this mental cultivation method. Ordinary people who didn't know martial arts, all the way to powerful people who could move mountains and fill seas. All of them could benefit from this set of cultivation method. All of them could use it. It could be applied to good people and bad people. If such a cultivation method were to be circulated outside and fall into the hands of some evil people, it could be said that there would be endless trouble. When villains and evil people obtained such a cultivation method, the higher their cultivation, the greater the trouble they would cause. For the first time in her life, Zi Xueqing was so worried that she couldn't eat. At night, she called Chu Yang over and asked him this question. Minister Chu was also stunned. He didn't expect his teacher to have such an earth-shattering ability. For a moment, Chu Yang couldn't help but feel proud. However, Chu Yang couldn't do anything about Zi Xueqing's worries. People like him definitely had to learn it. As long as this set of cultivation method was created, it would definitely be circulated. As for who it would eventually be circulated to, only God knew. Let's not care so much. Let's practice first. Chu Yang said in the end. Let's benefit first and circulate it among the few of us. For the time being, there's no need to worry about it being leaked. As for the circulation, it'll be a long time later. When that time comes, we still don't know where we are. Who can care about what happens in the future? Just like men now, it's good enough that we can get married and hug our wives to sleep every night. Do you want to care about your grandson, who will be a bachelor 100,000 years later? Do whatever you want. You're really a woman. There's no cure for you. Get out. Zi Xueqing roared. Minister Chu came up with a brilliant idea. But the result was that he was kicked out by Zi Xueqing. He crashed through the door and fell into the snow, looking very pathetic. Mo Qinggu was practicing in the courtyard. When she saw Chu Yang fall out, her heart ached. She climbed up and came to help him. She complained, "Brother Chu Yang, you're being a hooligan to Sister Zi again. Sigh, even if you want to be a hooligan to her, you should have some confidence before doing so. You're not as strong as her now. You're just asking for a beating." Chu Yang banged his head on the ground. Look at what this little girl is saying. Am I that kind of person? Immediately, Zi Xueqing gathered Baluqing, Feng and Yu Wu Qianqian Dong Wushang, Mo Lei Rui Batong, Mo Qinggu, Chu Luer and Chu Yang, and seriously imparted this technique to them. And there was a strict requirement. It wasn't that the technique was forbidden to be spread to outsiders, but, if they wanted to impart it, they must be of good character, and keep it strictly a secret. This secret should be kept to the greatest extent for as long as possible. As for the future, It was still Chu Yang's way of saying, when the time comes that I can't control them anymore, do whatever you want. When they're not here anymore, what's there to control? Bu Luqing and the Feng and Yu trio had high cultivations, and were most worried about this problem. Getting this technique was like getting a treasure. This mental cultivation technique could completely avoid inner demons. Avoid inner demons. For people at the level of Bu Luqing and the Feng and Yu couple, such a technique was even better than taking an elixir that could allow them to ascend immediately. An absolute treasure. Dong Wuxiang and the rest were also very excited. Zi Xieching originally didn't want to take credit for herself, but Meng Chaoran was determined not to admit that this technique was created by himself. Zi Xieching could only accept everyone's gratitude with a slightly red face. She felt that this was the most embarrassing thing she had ever done in her life. With this technique, when everyone practiced, they realized that the efficiency of their practice was 3 times higher than usual. Even Mo Qinggu, Wu Qianqian, Chuluer, Feng Yuro, Mo Lei and the rest of the women were more than 3 times faster than usual. From this point, it could be seen that women usually let their imaginations run wild twice, or even more than men. Scary women. The heavy snow lasted for a whole half a month. The snow on the flat ground was very deep, reaching up to the knees. In many places in Tianji City, there were actually snow disasters, and things like houses collapsing due to heavy snow actually happened frequently. According to Bu Luqing, such heavy snow was the first time in tens of thousands of years that something like this had happened in Tianji City, which was located at the southern end of the region. It was really a strange thing. However, as the heavy snow continued to fall, the air in Tianji City became fresher and fresher. Following that, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth became denser. This made all the martial artists in Tianji City extremely happy. This day, Zi Xieching was watching Chu Yang and the rest practice. Suddenly, she felt something and spread out her divine cognition. She muttered, "The Dharma Supreme is back." Chu Yang was startled. He asked, "He came back alone?" Zi Xieching said, "Yes, he came back alone." Came back alone? Chu Yang couldn't understand. He had originally thought that the Dharma Supreme went out this time to get reinforcements. For example, that legendary Wu Jueching. However, he came back alone. That was somewhat inconceivable. Could it be that the Dharma Supreme didn't find any reinforcements? During this period of time, many people of unknown origins entered Tianji City again. Chu Yang speculated that these people should be the secret forces of the big clans. They were also the main forces behind the conspiracy that the Dharma Supreme and the big clans were preparing. He paid close attention to these people. However, once these people entered Tianji City, they disappeared without a trace, like water droplets entering the sea. Even divine cognition couldn't detect them. The more he couldn't detect them, the more Chu Yang felt that there was danger. Now that he heard that the Dharma Supreme came back alone, Chu Yang felt even more strange. Of course, what Chu Yang and Zi Xieching didn't expect was that in the direction of the north gate of Tianji City, there was a person riding a fast horse. Just like an ordinary martial artist, he had retracted all his aura and galloped into Tianji City. Then he disappeared. These few days, Bu Liuqing's reaction was also very strange. Other than being absolutely quiet when he was practicing that kind of mental cultivation technique, once he was done, his personality would become inexplicably irritable. Bu Luqing himself was also somewhat puzzled by such a change. Logically speaking, with his cultivation, he should be able to control his own emotions. Such a situation shouldn't happen. However, how could this abnormality be explained? Even his disciple Qinggu, who he usually couldn't bear to speak with a heavy accent, was reprimanded a few times. Looking at his disciple's teary eyes, Bu Luqing felt that he couldn't understand himself anymore. Could it be that something happened to old Ning? Bu Luqing muttered to himself. Then he laughed involuntarily. How could something happen to old Ning's cultivation? Even if something happened to everyone in the world, nothing would happen to old Ning. However, his mood continued to become irritable. This mood lasted for almost a month before it slowly disappeared. Bu Luqing didn't mind it either, because the finals of the medicine banquet were about to arrive. A month had already passed. The finals of the medicine banquet was tomorrow. This finals would decide the ownership of the heaven-nourishing jade, and the important matter of Zunbutian. It would decide the future of heaven. Chu Yang was ready to go. Chapter 1089. Early morning. Chu Yang walked out of the room, and saw that Mo Qinggu was already waiting outside. Seeing Chu Yang come out, she couldn't help but pout. Big brother Chu Yang, you're so lazy. You woke up so late. I've been waiting for a long time. Why are you waiting for me? Chu Yang was surprised. I'll go with you. Mo Qinggu waved her little fist. I want to see big brother Chu Yang win. No. It's too dangerous. Chu Yang was shocked. What time was it now that the little girl actually wanted to go and cheer for him? It's okay. Zi Xieching's voice said. I'll use my divine sense to monitor. Besides, the Moon Breeze couple has already gone. Bu Luqing will look after little Wu in the dark. Nothing will happen to little Wu. You just have to take care of yourself. Chu Yang breathed a sigh of relief and said, Since that's the case, I'm relieved. After breakfast, Chu Yang held Mo Qingwu's little hand, and the two of them walked out side by side. Wu Qianqian faintly looked at the backs of the two people and sighed softly. Walking in the white snow, Mo Qingwu's red dress looked even more like a blazing fire. Her whole person was like a lively elf, full of vitality. Her pink little face was filled with a happy smile. Feeling Chu Yang's warmth in her hand, the little girl felt even happier and more satisfied. Chu Yang was shocked to realize that he had always thought that little Wu didn't grow up. Today, walking side by side, he realized that Mo Qingwu's height had already reached his chin. This could almost be considered a tall figure among women. Moreover, her eyes were becoming more and more full. Her chest also seemed to be expanding day by day. Her perky little, but was also quietly developing. Her small waist was becoming slimmer and slimmer. When she walked, that kind of unintentional and gentle rhythm had already begun to have some of the charm of a young girl. The little girl had grown up. Chu Yang thought about it a little emotionally. Thinking about how Mo Qinggu was so charming and affectionate in his previous life, he couldn't help but feel a faint bitterness in his heart. Although his lover was by his side now, for some reason, Mo Qingwu's pair of resentful eyes in his previous life still appeared in his dreams sometimes. Brother Chu Yang, I've been dreaming for the past few days. It's so strange. Mo Qinggu hopped around in the snow and turned her face to the side. She was dressed in red, and her hair was like a waterfall, making her small face look even more delicate. Her eyelashes also appeared to be longer, like two beautiful little fans that were flickering. Her cherry lips were red and pouty, making people want to peck them. Chu Yang's heart was filled with tender affection as he looked at her. He was somewhat lost in thought, so he casually asked, Qingwu, what good dream did you have? Tell me, did you dream of me? Brother Chu Yang, I've been having a strange dream for the past few days. The same dream? Mo Qingwu's eyes were somewhat confused and blurred. There was also a kind of faint sadness and hidden bitterness. This kind of gaze made Chu Yang frightened. This expression. Why was it so similar to Qingwu's in his previous life? The same dream? What dream? When Chu Yang said this, he felt that his throat was a little dry. A strange dream. In the dream, there was you and me. In the dream, I had already grown up. Mo Qingwu lowered her eyes and said, Then on a mountain, there was a purple bamboo forest. I went there to pick purple bamboo roots. Then I met you. But you were so lonely in the dream. Chu Yang, who was walking forward in the snow, suddenly stopped in his tracks. He was dumbstruck. A large piece of snow under his feet was kicked up by him and scattered in all directions. Brother Chu Yang? Mo Qinggu was originally deep in thought as she walked forward. Chu Yang suddenly stopped, but she continued to walk forward 2 steps before she realized it. She hurriedly turned around and asked, Nothing, you can continue. Chu Yang only felt a wave of dizziness. Actually, it's nothing. At that time, although you were lonely, you made people's hearts ache. When I saw you, I felt that this man had suffered too much pain and wanted to comfort him. Then, we got to know each other just like that. But in the dream, you were so heartless. Mo Qinggu pouted and said aggrievedly, I was so accommodating to you and liked you so much, but you always bullied me. Bullied you? Chu Yang murmured. You always asked me to leave you. But I couldn't bear to. In the dream, other than you, no one was good to me. Mo Qinggu said with tears in her eyes. Chu Yang suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart. We met 3 times in the purple bamboo forest, and then, it was always you. Mo Qinggu suddenly blushed as she said this. She was a little shy and didn't continue. What about me? Chu Yang asked in confusion. It was always you who was bad. Mo Qinggu pouted, blushing. She lowered her eyes and looked down, embarrassed. Chu Yang scratched his head. Humph. Anyway, every time you saw me, you took off my clothes. You're not allowed to ask. Mo Qinggu stomped her feet and said coquettishly with a red face. Chu Yang was dumbfounded. Then, what do you mean by then? Mo Qinggu said angrily. Every time I dream of this, I wake up so embarrassing, such a strange dream. Big bad guy. Chu Yang heaved a sigh of relief and asked seriously. You have such dreams every night? Not really. It's just that since the beginning of the first half of the year, sometimes I would dream of it, and sometimes I wouldn't dream of it. Until recently, when I came here and met you, such dreams suddenly increased. Mo Qinggu lowered her eyes. Her eyelashes flickered a couple of times. Finally, she quietly raised her eyelashes and stole a glance at Chu Yang. Then, she hurriedly lowered her eyelashes and said softly, Big brother Chu Yang, I think. I am. You are what? Chu Yang asked. I think. I like you too much. That's why I have such dreams every night. Mo Qingwu raised her head. She bit her lips and squinted her eyes. She looked a little shy and secretly happy. Then she said in a soft voice, Elder brother Chu Yang, I'm not afraid of you being bad. But can I ask you to be a little gentler to me in my dreams? Chu Yang only felt that his entire mouth and throat had become dry. Even his voice was hoarse. He coughed twice and said with some bitterness and pain, Qinggu, you're so silly. That's a dream, and it's your dream. How can I make the decision? Mo Qingwu's eyes suddenly focused. Yes, that's the tone. In the dream, you never call me Little Wu, you always call me Qinggu. Just like how you called me just now, it's the exact same voice. Chu Yang took a deep breath and looked at Mo Qinggu in a daze. He suddenly felt like his heart was being twisted. Big brother Chu Yang. Mo Qinggu raised her head and looked at him with some sadness. Will you be very bad to me in the future, just like in the dream? I won't. Chu Yang stretched out his arms and pulled this petite figure into his arms. He hugged her tightly and murmured, I won't. Mo Qinggu curled up in his arms and smiled contentedly. She said softly, Big brother Chu Yang, I like you so much. She suddenly raised her head and looked into Chu Yang's eyes. She stared blankly for a while. Then, she stood on her tiptoes and moved her petal-like red lips closer. She touched Chu Yang's lips lightly and stopped for a moment. But before Chu Yang could react, she immediately lowered her head and buried it deep in Chu Yang's arms. She closed her eyes and pressed her body tightly against him. She murmured, as if she was sleep-talking, Big brother Chu Yang, don't bully me. Little Wu likes you so much that I'm about to die. Chu Yang was still recalling the soft touch on his lips. At this moment, there was actually a kind of space-time confusion where the past and present life suddenly overlapped. There was a kind of sadness and worry in his heart. Only Chu Yang knew that Mo Qingwu's dream was not a dream. This was something that really happened in the past life. But why would it appear in Qingwu's dream in this life? If this continued, wouldn't Qingwu realize her dream sooner or later? Dream until her last day? Or would she suddenly recover the memories of her past life? Chu Yang suddenly felt his heart twitching. The two of them walked slowly in the snow. At this moment, Chu Yang suddenly felt that there was no one else in this world except himself and Qingwu. And Mo Qingwu obviously felt the same. The little girl was unusually quiet. She leaned against Chu Yang and walked forward step by step. At this moment, the whole world was indescribably peaceful. Just like a dream, all the sounds around them seemed to have disappeared. It was only until they turned the corner of the street and heard the hubbub of voices in front that the two of them suddenly woke up from their dream. The two of them couldn't help but look at each other. Mo Qingwu's cheeks were as red as an apple. Her eyes were watery, with an inexplicable shyness and sweetness. She whispered, "Big brother Chu Yang, I like it so much." "I like it so much too." Chu Yang smiled gently. Mo Qinggu opened her arms happily and twirled around in the snow. Then, the two of them realized that it was actually snowing. It turned out that their hair and clothes were covered with snowflakes. "Big brother Chu Yang, when I was young, my mother taught me how to dance. When you are free, I will dance for you." Mo Qinggu giggled. Her eyes flashed with mischief and tenderness. She said, "I will dance to the heavens for you." Chu Yang's heart trembled. At this moment, he recalled a poem, and also a very important matter. Light as a dream, floating in the air, enchanting as a sea of blood and a mountain of bones dance. Don't ask the sword for 1,000 miles. Life and death follow to the heavens. This was a poem written for Mo Qinggu by his friend in the previous life, the world's #1 genius, Xue Leihan. In the previous life, the three of them often gathered together. Every time Mo Qinggu followed him, Xue Leihan was always very envious. Xue Leihan became famous at a young age, and his poetic talent shook the world. By the time he got to know him, he was already famous. He could be said to be an unparalleled legend. His poems were being sung everywhere in the upper and lower three heavens. Since ancient times, there had never been anyone who could achieve such achievements just by relying on poems. But, after his rebirth, he had never heard of Xue Leihan's name. There was no such person at all. Chapter 1090. Ever since Chu Yang was reborn, he had never considered this matter. Or rather, there was no such thing in his memory, until just now when Mo Qinggu said, "For you, I will dance to the heavens." Chu Yang was suddenly enlightened when he heard this sentence. When he thought of this poem, he thought of this person, Xue Leihan. So he had always neglected this person. Why? Thinking of Xue Leihan, Chu Yang suddenly thought of many things. Only then did he realize that there were too many differences between this life and his previous life. In his previous life, he was the poisonous sword-revered martial artist. Although his name was resounding, he was only a revered martial artist. However, he was able to roam freely in the lower three heavens, and even some places in the lower three heavens. There were no king-level experts in the lower three heavens at all. When Mo Tianji ambushed him, he only sent out 3 king-level experts. But in this life, Mo clan had more than 3 king-level experts. They even had emperor-level experts. In the upper three heavens, king-level experts were not even worth mentioning. Emperor-level experts were not worth mentioning. Monarch-level experts were just SOSO. Saint-level experts were common. Supreme-level experts. Looking at it now, there were probably thousands, or even tens of thousands of them, in the entire upper three heavens. In his previous life, there were 2 legends, Supreme Martial Artist Chen Feng and Supreme Martial Artist Lu Yan. In the legends of the current generation of Supreme Martial Artists, there were only Ning Tianya and Bulu Qing. And now? Perhaps he was ignorant and inexperienced in his previous life. And when he reached the upper three heavens, he was like a rat crossing the street, dying before he could even obtain the 5th fragment of the sword. But legends were legends after all. Was he that ignorant and inexperienced? And most importantly, Xue Leihan, such a peerless talent whose name shook the heavens in this life, there was no one at all. Absolutely none. Completely none. Why was this so? Thinking of Xue Leihan, Chu Yang's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly felt a vague sense of familiarity. That fortune-telling elder, Xiaoyan Mo Qinggu, on the path of 3 lives can mend the heavens. Yin and Yang must cherish the beauty. Evil aura is awe-inspiring. Do not speak nonsense. So familiar, Xue Leihan. So it was you. Chu Yang was stunned. He was now 100% sure that the fortune-telling elder he and Zi Xieching met in Tianji City was the one who had become friends with him in his previous life. The world's #1 genius Xue Leihan. But at that time, he did not recognize him. Who exactly was he? What exactly was going on? Chu Yang's mind suddenly turned into a mass of paste. The more he thought, the more confused he became. The more he thought, the more he didn't have a clue. He could only faintly feel that if he could solve all of this, then he would discover an earth-shattering secret. At this moment, Mo Qinggu said, "That person is so strange." Chu Yang was startled. He looked up. A few hundred feet in front of him, there was a white-clothed man walking on the snow. This road was the only way to the medicine banquet. At this moment, the streets were crowded with people. Although it was early in the morning, it was extremely lively. However, this white-robed man walked among the bustling crowd with a warm smile on his face. He looked very amiable, but it felt as if he had been lonely for tens of thousands of years. He was so out of tune with everything around him. This person stepped on the white snow, crunching as he walked. Every step he took left a deep footprint. It should be very strenuous to walk like this, but looking at his posture, he was like a spring breeze, so leisurely and relaxed. It is very strange. Alarm bells rang in Chu Yang's heart. If he didn't guess wrongly, this person should be an extremely dangerous person. Just as he was thinking, this white-robed man had already walked to a place not far in front of them. He suddenly turned his head, as if he had suddenly discovered the two of them. He smiled and said, "What a red-robed girl, really as cute as a pearl." Mo Qinggu blushed and hid behind Chu Yang. She only secretly revealed half of her face to watch. Chu Yang smiled and cupped his hands. "You flatter me, may I know who you are?" The white-robed man smiled and said, "Medicine Master, not up to standard." He seemed to be smiling bitterly, but was full of confidence. He said, "I didn't even pass the first round and was eliminated, so I went to watch the fun." Chu Yang smiled. "I see," he said, "why don't we go together?" When he said this, the white-robed man also said, "Why don't we go together?" The two of them looked at each other and smiled. Chu Yang's smile was tolerant and amiable, while the white-robed man's smile was gentle and warm. But when Mo Qinggu saw the two of them smiling, she suddenly shuddered. The two of them walked side by side. The white-robed man smiled and said, "Brother Chu, this time, you are going to win the championship. I am here today specially to cheer you on." Chu Yang revealed a surprised expression and laughed. "So you know me?" The white-robed man shook his head and laughed. "Brother Chu, you are the best. How many of the medicine masters in this Tianji city don't know you?" Chu Yang laughed heartily, in a very comfortable manner. He said, "It depends on luck. Not necessarily, there are so many experts, I have no confidence at all." He said that he had no confidence at all, but his voice and expression were obviously fake modesty, obviously full of confidence. The white-robed man lowered his head and didn't seem to look at him. He said, "Brother Chu, you don't have to be humble. With your attainments, it is not a problem for you to become number one in the world." At this moment, someone suddenly called from the roadside, "Hey, Brother Lu!" The white-robed man stopped and said apologetically, "Brother Chu, I met a friend." Chu Yang hurriedly said, "Brother, please go ahead." The white-robed man smiled apologetically and hurriedly turned to the side of the person who called from the roadside. The two of them were very intimate, as if they had met after a long time. Chu Yang and Mo Qinggu continued to walk in the thick snow. The two of them were still talking as usual. They turned a corner and entered another road. They were only a few hundred feet away from the venue of the medicine banquet. At the roadside just now, the white-robed man was still smiling, but his face had already turned cold. A black shadow appeared silently and asked with a smile, "Brother Wu, is it him?" The white-robed man shook his head and said, "I don't think so, but this little one hides really well. You guys told me that he is a first-grade martial monarch, but there is a hidden sword will on him. Looking at the situation, his real cultivation is definitely at the level of a sword saint, and not lower than the 5th grade. The black-robed man heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Then I am relieved. A sword saint is not scary, but since he is a sword saint, he must have come from the path of a sword emperor. And the tribulation sword master can never become a sword emperor." The white-robed man said, "Yes. So, this Chu Yang is definitely not the tribulation sword master. But this young man is definitely not even 20 years old. He already has such a shocking cultivation, and the inheritance of the medical saint. He can be said to be the one and only genius in this world. If this person develops, his future achievements may not be lower than that of the tribulation sword master." When the two of them were talking, when they said the words tribulation sword master, they gritted their teeth and were full of hatred. The black-robed man was silent for a while and said, Then Brother Wu, have you done it? The white-robed man snorted and said, Of course I won't let him off so easily. Along the way, I have already poisoned him with 7 kinds of strong poisons. These 7 kinds of strong poisons are incurable. Usually, they keep each other in check, and he is fine. But once the time limit is reached, they will act up immediately. Like a sudden wind, there is no way to recover. During the finals, I will let him act up. The black-robed man heaved a sigh of relief and said, Brother Wu, you have worked hard. The white-robed man smiled faintly and said, Not really, but to poison such a small character is a little demeaning. The two of them chuckled and suddenly disappeared. On the other side, Chu Yang turned the corner. The sword spirit's voice, which was almost dripping with cold sweat, came out. Oh my God, I really saw a ghost. Saw a ghost. Her. Chu Yang was not surprised at all. He said calmly, That person just now should be Wu Jueqing, right? The sword spirit was startled. How did you know? I just know. Chu Yang smiled. Intuition. Then he said, he didn't recognize me. Then he said, if he did, then I would have become a pile of rotten meat by now. The sword spirit sighed and said, You are absolutely right. Wu Jueqing's hatred for the Tribulation Sword Master far surpasses that of this Dharma Supreme. Chu Yang said understandingly, because Wu Jueqing's identity is special. Her. As the successor of Supreme Martial Artist Chen Feng, he is held in high regard wherever he goes. When has he ever suffered any setbacks or been cheated in his life? How can he not hate someone who has been played around with his whole life? He said casually, What kind of poison did he give me? The sword spirit was stunned. You can feel that he has poisoned you? Chu Yang smiled lightly. I can't feel it. Even until now I haven't felt it at all. But Wu Jueqing didn't specially come to me to say these few words. 7 types of poisons balance each other and cause paralysis. The sword spirit smiled. However, he doesn't want your life. Looks like he only wants you in the finals. Chu Yang clicked his tongue and said, Amazing. Can it be cured? The sword spirit said, Of course there is no problem. This type of poison can only be absorbed by the Tribulation Sword. If Wu Jueqing finds out that you are actually not poisoned, he will immediately know that you are the Tribulation Sword Master. Wu Jueqing will then come and kill you. Even in the finals, you won't be able to stop him. Chu Yang pondered and said, Is there any other way? Yes. The sword spirit chuckled. You can now put a bottle of spiritual spring water in your arms and drink half a bottle. This type of poison can be delayed for a period of time before acting up. I will extract the poison, and you will complete the competition. Even if Wu Jueqing comes and sees the spiritual spring water, he will also know the reason. Chu Yang's eyes lit up. He made me paralyzed. Feng, it shouldn't be as simple as just stopping me in the finals. Instead, he should have other motives. Otherwise, with Wu Jueqing's status, why would he poison me? He might as well kill me with one palm. Wouldn't that be easier? Chapter 1091. The sword spirit thought for a while and said, Maybe. Chu Yang pondered, threatening him with the antidote. It's a little too naive. It should be just a part of the plan. Speaking up to this point, Chu Yang suddenly became excited. Tell me about the symptoms after the wind. Even if I used the spiritual spring water to delay it, it would still act up eventually. He poisoned me and I poisoned him. Isn't this a very normal thing? The sword spirit smiled bitterly. You even want to make use of this. You're really scheming. Chu Yang said, I was poisoned. How can it be considered scheming? Then he asked, I'm the only one poisoned, right? Is Qinggu alright? The sword spirit smiled bitterly. Wu Jueqing is also a person of great status. Do you think he would poison a little girl for no reason? Chu Yang snorted. Not necessarily. I don't trust any of these people now. After receiving the sword spirit's confirmation that Mo Qinggu wasn't poisoned, Chu Yang was relieved. The sword spirit thought for a while and said, However, compared to being poisoned, there's another more important matter. Therefore, Wu Jueqing is here this time. We definitely can't let him go. If there's a battle, we really have to fight. Chu Yang frowned and immediately thought of something. He couldn't help but gasp. Sword intent. Yes. The sword spirit smiled bitterly. I sensed the aura of sword intent on Wu Jueqing's body. Chu Yang's face twitched. He immediately felt troubled. How can we get it back? There are 3 ways. The sword spirit said. The first way is to capture Wu Jueqing and extract the sword intent from him. He should only be keeping it for his own use temporarily, and can't refine it. The tribulation sword intent can't be refined by others. Capture Wu Jueqing? Chu Yang smiled bitterly. Let's talk about the second way. The second way is to kill Wu Jueqing. The sword spirit smiled and said, the sword intent will automatically disperse from his body, and then we can collect it. Chu Yang said speechlessly, you might as well not say it. Just based on Wu Jueqing's cultivation alone, it's already extremely difficult to kill him. Moreover, Wu Jueqing is the descendant of supreme martial artist Chen Feng. Moreover, Chen Feng clearly dotes on him a lot, even going as far as to use the method of stealing the sky and swapping the sun to save him from the tribulation mending heavens. If Wu Jueqing dies, how can martial sage Chen Feng let the matter rest? And supremacy Chen Feng and supremacy Lu Yun are husband and wife. Am I supposed to fight Chen Feng and Lu Yun with my current strength? Let's consider the third option. Chu Yang smiled bitterly. The third method is to reveal your identity as Tribulation Sword Master, and use the Tribulation Sword to absorb the energy swords, the sword spirit said with a bitter smile. Moreover, the distance must be within 1,000 feet. Black lines appeared on Chu Yang's face. This third method makes my crotch cramp even more. Is there a fourth method? No more. There are only 3 ways. The sword spirit was very straightforward. Fuck. Chu Yang was speechless. He asked the heavens, aren't you fucking cheating me? Given my insignificant strength, it is enough for me to dominate the lower 3 heavens. But you want me to kill Wu Jueqing? Don't you think it's a bit too much to ask? The sword spirit said submissively. But you have experts by your side. Chu Yang was speechless. He rolled his eyes at him and sighed heavily. Then he left the tribulation space. He didn't want to waste any more words with the sword spirit. They were already at the end. No one was allowed to watch the finals of the medicine banquet. This was the rule. However, even though the rules were as such, there was still a sea of people present. Snow fell from the sky and the ground was full of people. Chu Yang whispered into Emo Qingwu's ear. Qingwu, when I enter the finals later, your teacher will come to look for you. Remember to tell him that Wu Jueqing is here. These 5 words. Let him pass the message to Moon Breeze. Don't let anyone else hear it. Do you understand? Emo Qingwu's eyes flashed with doubt, but she nodded heavily. Brother Chu Yang, don't worry. I will definitely do it. Okay. Chu Yang turned and walked toward the finals. Emo Qingwu waved her little fists behind him, jumping and shouting, Brother Chu Yang, go for it. This caused a lot of people to look at him. The little girl didn't care at all. Chu Yang smiled and entered the gate guarded by the Medicine Valley's personnel. The other pharmacists selected that day were already present. Seeing Chu Yang walk in, everyone's expression was heavy, full of vigilance. Although they had already experienced it once, compared to this young man in front of them, they really felt that they had no chance of winning at all. The previous time, the result of doubling in half the time, had almost completely destroyed all of this pharmacist's confidence. And this time, it was a finals with even greater significance. It directly involved the ownership of the title of #1 pharmacist in the world. After the finals this time, the refinement of the heaven-nourishing jade would begin immediately. Once the heaven-nourishing jade was completed, the nourishment of the heavens would begin on the 3rd day. It would complete the magnificent feat of nourishing the heavens in the history of the heavenly realm. All of this glory would fall on the head of the champion of the finals. The snowflakes became denser and denser. In the end, one couldn't even see the figures on the other side. Such heavy snow was truly a rare sight. In the vast expanse of whiteness, the finals of the medicine banquet finally began. The high priest of the Medicine Valley personally came to greet the 10 people to enter the designated environment for the finals. When Chu Yang walked in, as if telepathically, he looked back and saw a red shadow swaying high up in the distance. A crisp voice came from afar. Chu Yang, go for it. It was Emo Qingwu's voice. A smile appeared at the corner of Chu Yang's mouth. This little girl has finally revealed her ambition. She thinks that I can't see her. She actually started to call me by my full name, with a smile. Chu Yang entered the arena. Outside the arena, at the top of a big tree covered in snow, Wuxia, dressed in green, stood with his hands behind his back. Mo Qinggu stood beside him. Her petite figure looked even more delicate in the white snow. At this moment in the cold weather, the little girl breathed out hot air. Her face flushed red with excitement. There was a kind of infinite tenderness surging in her heart. I called his name. I don't want to call him Brother Chu Yang anymore. I want to call him Chu Yang. This is how husband and wife address each other. Sister Wu Qianqian has ambitions for him. She thinks that I can't tell. This is so embarrassing. At the thought of these two words, the little girl was so embarrassed that she felt as if she had a fever. She only felt that her body was a little weak, and she actually almost fell from the treetop. Wuxia was shocked. He grabbed hold of the little girl, so that she didn't fall from the sky. Supreme martial artist Bu was extremely puzzled. Although I haven't given this little disciple of mine a huge boost in her cultivation for the time being, she's already a first-grade martial saint. Why is it that she actually fell from the tree while standing with such a cultivation? This is really extremely strange. Under the high priest's lead, the 10 people entered the arena. Then, the high priest led them into the huge palace that was almost made out of an entire mountain. Along the way, there were many sentries. At the outermost periphery, there were monarch-level and emperor-level experts. As they went in, as the line of defense shrank, it became martial saint-level experts. There were more than one such line of defense. Then, when they entered the palace, Chu Yang realized that there was a person standing in every corner outside the palace. They stood solemnly and motionlessly. The fluttering snow had almost buried them. It could be seen that they were already here before the finals, perhaps a day or a few days ago. They were only guarding this empty field to prevent anyone from sneaking in. Every one of these people was a supreme martial artist. Such a tight defense made Chu Yang feel a little shocked. Upon entering the main hall, a fresh and warm wind suddenly greeted them. There was also a strong fragrance of flowers, and the fragrance of herbs. There were more than 10,000 types of elixirs in the medicine banquet. There were hundreds of thousands of types, and there was definitely more than one stock of each type. They were all in this main hall. There were so many types of elixirs. Every type could be said to be a heavenly treasure. Most of the large clan stockpiles over the past 1,000 years, all the resources of the Medicine Valley over the past 1,000 years, all the heavenly treasures that the Zhuge clan had collected over the past 10,000 years. They were all here. The elixirs here were enough to make anyone in the world so excited that they would have a nervous breakdown on the spot upon seeing them. All the elixirs here were not packed in boxes. They were just laid out naked in circles. Their roots, tubers, flowers, and petals were all exposed outside. At a glance, one could not see the end of them. They were densely packed. But there was no loss of medicinal energy at all. And the medicinal properties were not messed up at all. Although the elixirs were tightly packed together, they all seemed to maintain a safe distance from each other. This was the greatest characteristic of heavenly treasures: independence. Only with this characteristic could a stock of elixir be qualified to be called a heavenly treasure. Moreover, each and every stock of spirit medicine was full of vitality under such circumstances. Some had tender shoots, some even grew new branches, and some even had flower buds. It was cold and snowy outside. Inside, tens of thousands of elixirs were actually flourishing, and there were even clusters of fresh flowers blooming, just like spring. This was just a very ordinary space. There was nothing special about it at all. How could this be? Looking at the clusters of blooming fresh flowers opposite him, Chu Yang almost suspected that he was dreaming. In the middle of the main hall, there were 10 pillars with a radius of 10 feet. They were 50 feet tall and emitted a dark brown glow. It was unknown what material they were made of. At the top of the pillars there was a huge lotus. A strange aura was constantly being sucked in from all directions into this lotus land. The high priest's expression was solemn. He coughed and said, "Everyone, now is the time for the finals of the medicine banquet. This is the place of the great heaven reversing array. Where everyone is at is the position of the eye of the array. Chapter 1092. Chu Yang's heart couldn't help but tremble. It actually took 100 years to complete a formation. The high priest said slowly, "When this formation is completed, it will cover the entire world. Currently, all the fortunes of all the pharmacists in the world have already swept over from the upper and lower three heavens. A total of 810,000 heavenly treasures from the upper and lower three heavens are all gathered here. Currently only Tianji City is missing. Everyone, this final round will decide the fate of the heavens." The high priest paused and swept his gaze across the 10 people. He said, "The interior of the great sky-turning formation is the most impregnable in the world. Everyone, the final round will be held here. The semi-final round has already tested everyone's level of refinement. It can be said that any one of you, as long as you become the champion, will be able to refine the heaven-nourishing jade. Therefore, your level of refinement will not be repeated. The 10 pillars in front of everyone and the lotus flowers on top are the paths of fortune. Between them are the flower buds. Everyone sit on them now. The first person to cause the flower buds of fortune to bloom will be the one with the strongest fortune and the champion." The high priest finished speaking. There was an uproar below. Chu Yang looked at everyone's shocked expression and instantly understood. It seemed like they didn't know about the selection method this time either. Or, it was beyond their expectations. The pharmacists from the big clans were extremely surprised. Because the final round of the medicine banquets in the past was always the extremely difficult medicine decomposition. For this matter, some of them had even made thorough preparations in advance. Who would have thought that the Medicine Valley would suddenly change their method at this crucial moment? This really left everyone at a loss. Everyone may be a little surprised, but this is normal. The medicine banquets in the past were indeed like what your seniors said, never changing. But this time, it will be the last time in 10,000 years. All the wrinkles on the high priest's face seemed to be smiling, like a sly fox. Therefore, this time, the method is completely different from the past. This time, the stakes are very high. Therefore, the final round this time is a competition of fortune. It has nothing to do with cultivation. It has nothing to do with mental strength. It has nothing to do with identity or experience. It has nothing to do with pure fortune. Among all of you, the one with the strongest fortune will be the champion. Then, he manipulated the 1,000 years of providence and fused the 810,000 types of heavenly materials and earthly treasures into one cauldron. This is the strongest heaven-nourishing jade. Only those with great luck are qualified to refine the heaven-nourishing jade this time." The high consecrator said indifferently, "I must remind everyone that this grand formation is related to heaven and earth. Even if he wasn't the first, he would still have to wait until the Providence lotus bloomed. If anyone dares to play tricks, they will definitely die on the spot. Now let's begin the competition." They all stepped onto the top of the stone pillar in front of them. "After everyone enters your positions, I will immediately activate the grand array," the high consecrator ordered. Chu Yang was somewhat dumbfounded. The sword spirit in the tribulation space didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He had thought that there was something unusual about the finals of the medicine banquet. But it turned out that it was just a competition of luck. If that was the case, who in the world could be as lucky as the master of the Calamity Sword? Even the human emperors, law enforcers, and Dharma Supremes couldn't compare to the Tribulation Sword Master in terms of luck. Chu Yang came to participate in such a competition, and the finals were actually like this. Wasn't this just plain bullying? The 10 of them looked at each other, but no one moved first. They all wanted to see how the others would react after they sat on it. Chu Yang laughed heartily. Then his body floated high up in the air. His black robe fluttered in the wind as he arrived at the centermost stone pillar. Then, he stepped on it and lightly said, "Since no one wants to go first, then I will be the first one." He deliberately paused at the last 3 words of his sentence. After hearing it, one would have a feeling, "Then I shall be the first." What was the first? All the pharmacists were enraged. Then, they all leaped up and went to the top of the stone pillar. After Chu Yang went up, he saw that there was actually a stone stool in the middle of the lotus for people to meditate. In front of the stone stool, there was a dense fog that seemed to be forming a pure white flower bud. But it wasn't fully formed yet, as if it could be blown away by a gust of wind. Chuyang didn't hesitate anymore. He took 2 steps forward and sat cross-legged on the stone stool. Seeing that everyone had sat down, the High Consecrator looked solemn and shouted, "Grand Array, rise!" All the supreme martial artists outside moved at the same time. Each of them used their lifetime's cultivation to strike a point in the sky directly above. Waves of energy surged into the sky like mountains and seas. All the energy converged at one point. Thousands of feet high in the sky, snowflakes were hazy. Suddenly, a burst of blazing white light spread out fiercely. The entire grand array, the entire competition venue, suddenly disappeared from everyone's sight. Chuyang only felt that the hall had suddenly disappeared in an instant. His surroundings turned pitch black. Everything around him also disappeared at once. He actually seemed to be in an incomparably vast starry sky, sitting on a huge white lotus, and all around him was the vast universe. Stars dotted the sky. His position was like the core of the entire universe. Wisps of fog rose from Chuyang's body, becoming thicker and thicker, and poured into the half-formed flower bud in front of him. The next moment, Chuyang only felt lightning flashing and thunder rumbling in the sky above his head. But when he opened his eyes, nothing happened. When he closed his eyes, he felt lightning flashing all around him. Wisps of pure white fog gathered from all directions, no less than thousands of wisps, and then more and more. Tens of thousands of wisps, hundreds of thousands of wisps, millions of wisps, tens of millions of wisps, like hundreds of rivers flowing into the sea. They entered the flower bud in front of Chuyang. The flower bud solidified at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then slowly, a jade-green vine extended from the bottom of the flower bud. It was covered with fine hairs and thorns that were only found on the stem of a lotus. Holding the flower bud, it continued to rise. In the time it took to burn half an incense stick, it actually grew to a width of several feet and a height of more than 100 feet. Above, the flower bud that had already solidified began to slowly expand at this time. Bigger and bigger. The high priest stood on the original stone platform and gasped. "This Chuyang, what a strong fate energy." Looking from his direction, he saw that the lotus stalk on the stone platform, where Chuyang was standing. It was dozens of feet tall and several feet thick. But in front of the other person, the lotus stalk was only as thick as a finger. It had a small and pitiful bud on top of it. It hadn't even fully solidified yet. This was an overwhelming comparison. There was no comparison at all. So it's the heavenly fortune formation. In the tribulation space, the sword spirit was enlightened. "I thought it was something mysterious, so it's like this. It's using the fate energy of the world's pharmacists to save lives to refine the heaven-nourishing jade. Intercepting the fate energy of the tribulation sword master to repair the cracks in the universe." Chuyang asked curiously, "The previous tribulation sword masters have never participated in the medicine banquet." "No." The sword spirit smiled bitterly and said, "Not every tribulation sword master is as weird as you. Under normal circumstances, the tribulation sword masters are not in the upper 3 heavens during the medicine banquet. This is because after experiencing the spiritual impact of the lake of despair, the tribulation sword masters will fall into a long coma. And during this period, the heavens will be closed. Only after the tribulation sword master has trained for a period of time can he secretly enter the upper 3 heavens and start his journey as a tribulation sword master. If nothing happened to you, you would also be in the upper 3 heavens now. But you have a father and mother who were separated from you when you were a child. This is really fucking. They found you when you were in a coma. They brought you back to the upper 3 heavens. This has never happened before in the previous generations of tribulation sword masters." Chuyang raised his eyebrows and said, "I see. Then what's with the heavenly fortune formation? How should I deal with it?" "The heavenly fortune formation is to go against the heavens and take fate energy," the sword spirit said. "Using the power of the formation to communicate with the universe. Using the power of the universe to suppress and intercept the fate energy of the Tribulation Sword Master and Tribulation to mend the heavens. You are the Tribulation Sword Master. So how can you intercept your own fate energy in this formation? On the contrary, by urging the fate energy here, you can intercept the fate energy of the big clans and transmit it to your brothers. The sword spirit sighed deeply. This is really heaven's will. I've never seen such a fucking thing. 1,000 years of hard work and tens of millions of people working together. But all for one person. And he doesn't even realize it. Intercept the fate energy of the big clans. Chu Yang's eyes lit up. How? The sword spirit said. Wait a while. When the lotus blooms to the extreme, you can chant Tribulation's name in your heart. With the help of the heaven-defying power of the formation, you can naturally extract fate energy from the formation I and transmit it to them. Who is Tribulation? Chu Yang frowned. This question made the sword spirit speechless for a long time. You, as the Tribulation Sword Master, you actually don't know who is your Tribulation? Chu Yang rolled his eyes. How would I know? The sword spirit was completely defeated. Aren't Gu Duxing, Dong Wuxiang and the others your Tribulation? He said somewhat exasperatedly. Gu Duxing is sharp and lonely, so he is the sword tip. Dong Wuxiang is powerful and domineering, so he is the sword edge. Ao Xian is cold and sharp, so he is the sword edge. Mo Tianji is the master of calculation and manipulation, so he is the sword spirit. Luo Kadi is the sword guard. Rui Butong is agile and changeable, so he is the sword tongue. Xie Danqiong is steady, so he is the sword pommel. GMO may be funny, but he is steady and loyal, so he is the sword hilt. As for the sword tassel, it is up to the sword master to decide. Chu Yang finally understood. I see. When the time comes, you only need to chant their names in your heart, and the fate energy of the big clans will naturally be diverted. The sword spirit said excitedly. Then after the fate energy is diverted, will it be seen? Can the heaven-nourishing jade still be successfully refined? Chu Yang asked. The great heavenly fortune formation is heaven-defying. How can it be seen? Besides, there is no change in the fate energy of the pharmacists in the world. It is only the previous and future tribulations that are related to you. What does it have to do with the heaven-nourishing jade? The sword spirit rolled his eyes. Chapter 1093. As the power of destiny flowed in from all directions, it grew stronger and stronger. The lotus flowers in front of the pharmacists also began to slowly open their petals. One by one, the petals slowly opened. It was filled with the rhythm of life. Immortality. Humans could not be compared to each other. Chu Yang's lotus flower was several feet wide and had not fully opened. However, the other's lotus flowers were only the size of an ordinary lotus flower. Comparing the two, it was like comparing a fluorescent light to a bright sun. The next moment, an accident suddenly occurred. Under the high priest's incredulous gaze, the pharmacist from the Yi clan suddenly groaned and blood flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Then his face wrinkled, and his entire person became exhausted. His eyes were wide open and his mouth gurgled. In an instant, he actually stopped breathing. The lotus flower in front of him also seemed to have withered, and its petals fell one by one. Once they fell, they turned into green smoke and flew away. Then, the entire lotus flower completely withered. It drooped down softly. Then, the stem also drooped down softly and turned into a puff of green smoke, disappearing without a trace. What's going on? The high priest was shocked, and was about to go forward to check on it. However, he realized that the pharmacists from the other big clans also showed the same symptoms. They groaned and then died. Then, their lotus flowers dissipated. 10 pharmacists participated in the finals, and one of them died in the finals. Only Chu Yang was left. What was the point of competing? Even if he was not the champion, he was already the champion. But what was going on? The high priest was dumbfounded. He raised his hand to hit his head and rubbed his eyes. I must have seen wrongly. I'm crazy. I'm going crazy. Oh my God. What's going on? The pitiful old man watched in a daze as the pharmacist died an unnatural death, and the lotus flower turned into nothingness. He was dumbfounded. After a long time, he finally regained his senses. He leaped into the air and carried these people down. He lined them up in front of him and hurriedly checked on them with a pale face. "What's wrong? What's wrong?" Soon after, he discovered that their faces were all wrinkled, completely different from the previous smooth and rosy complexion. He tried to grab them, but he didn't expect that with this grab, he would actually tear them off. The High Consecrator jumped in fright again. He clutched his face, his heart thumping wildly. Taking a closer look, he saw that the face of the person who had scratched off his face was badly mutilated. The High Consecrator was startled and hurriedly scratched the faces of the others. As expected, all of them were like this. He continued to check. Finally, the Great Consecrator raised his head and cursed with a face full of grief and despair. "Soul transfer magic art. My fucking big family. Fuck your 18 generations of ancestors. You bunch of sons of bitches." He actually used the soul transfer technique to play tricks during the medicine banquet. "Fuck your mothers." An old man with a head full of white hair and a face full of wrinkles, an old medicine man who had lived for who knows how many years, cursed without caring about his appearance. Obscenities are endless, and they are cursing whatever is vicious. What kind of hatred was this? In an instant, the High Consecrator completely understood. The big clans and the 2 law enforcement officers. In order to obtain first place in the medicine banquet and obtain that piece of heaven-nourishing jade, they actually used the method of substituting experienced pharmacists who had participated in the medicine banquet before to replace them. They used the soul transfer magic art to obtain temporary luck and qualifications as a medicine master. They entered the finals. However, this last medicine banquet was different from the previous ones. They directly extracted luck. Therefore, in this place of luck, this medicine master's true colors were revealed. The new and old luck clashed, and he couldn't get down from the heaven-turning stage. He actually directly died from the aftereffects of activating the soul transfer magic art in advance. After figuring this out, the High Consecrator felt weak all over. He couldn't wait to bang his head and die here. He didn't even have the mood to curse anymore. You want to be first, sure. You want the heaven-nourishing jade, sure. But don't joke about the medicine banquet that concerns the future of the entire heavens. And it's the most important one. Isn't this a complete bastard? It's over. This was the only word in the High Consecrator's mind. Only when the luck was divided into 10, and the luck of the 10 lotuses, combined would it become the luck formed by the sharpness of the first medicine master. It would be enough to catalyze the heaven-turning formation, sweep in hundreds of thousands of elixirs, open the passage to heaven, draw in the power of heaven and earth, and then use the power of heaven and earth to refine the heaven-nourishing jade. Now one of them had died. What was the point of continuing? The High Consecrator raised his head in despair and looked up. The next moment, his whole body suddenly shook, and he stood there dumbfounded. Poor old man. In this short period of time, his whole body shook again and again, and there was no end to it. Because the lotus above Chu Yang's had actually expanded again. The destiny that had already disappeared seemed to have been reignited. It once again turned into a faint green smoke and entered Chu Yang's huge lotus. The High Consecrator was so shocked that he almost lost the ability to think. He could actually support the entire medicine banquet with his own luck. He couldn't help but cry. He knelt on the ground and prayed repeatedly. "I pray for heaven's blessing to complete this medicine banquet. Chu Yang, you must hold on." This was the only hope. On a faraway mountain, Wu Jiuecheng, who was dressed in white, smiled lightly. He stretched out his palm gently and made a simple gesture. He closed his palm and then opened it again. In his palm, there was already a ball of colorful air. The air was dense. "Break!" Wu Jiuecheng smiled lightly and closed his palm once again. That ball of colorful air suddenly dispersed with a pop sound. Wu Jiuecheng smiled lightly. Chu Yang observed with rapt attention, feeling the degree of bloom of the lotus above his head. Only the last 3 petals were left before it could fully bloom. He was secretly delighted. It looked like his wish was about to come true. Right at this moment, an indescribable feeling suddenly arose in his body. Then in the next moment, half of his body went numb. Wu Jiuecheng's 7 deadly poisons finally took effect at this crucial moment. Chu Yang let out a muffled groan. The High Consecrator was full of confidence and joy. He looked at Chu Yang alone with unease, praying to the gods and immortals in his heart. But Chu Yang's body trembled violently, and his heart instantly rose to his throat. Fuck, could this one also be a fake soul transfer spell? If that's the case, it's really over this time. He looked closely at Chu Yang's face, thinking to himself, once wrinkles appear, it means that this medicine banquet is a complete failure. Then, he realized that there were no wrinkles on Chu Yang's face. Just as he was about to heave a sigh of relief, he saw 7 different colors rising on Chu Yang's face. Then Chu Yang's body stiffened a little. 7 shades poison. The High Consecrator's eyes widened to the size of copper bells. He roared in grief and indignation. Wu Jueqing. Fuck your ancestors Chen Feng and Lu Yun. He never expected that when there was only a little bit of hope left, this Wu Jueqing, who had disappeared for tens of thousands of years, actually popped out to cause trouble. 7 shades poison. In this world, only Wu Jueqing alone could use it. The High Consecrator's heart turned cold. However, the lotus above Chu Yang's had only stopped blooming, and didn't completely disperse. It just stayed still in the air. Then, Chu Yang took out a jade bottle with purple crystal cores with some difficulty. He opened the bottle, and gulped down 2 mouthfuls of purple crystal cores. Then with a ha sound, he spat out a mouthful of 5-colored poisonous fog. Although there were still some remnants of the 7 shades poison on his face, it had temporarily returned to normal. The High Consecrator stretched his neck out, and his eyes almost popped out. What did he drink? He could actually cure. No, suppress the 7 shades poison? So powerful? The next moment, Chu Yang straightened his body with difficulty and sat up straight again. After a short while, the huge lotus above his head actually started to grow again and slowly bloomed. The High Consecrator's eyes were brimming with tears. At this moment, he almost had an impulse to worship Chu Yang. What kind of perseverance was this? What kind of spirit was this? What kind of selfless and fearless spirit was this? His life is at stake, and he's actually still working hard for the medicine banquet. While the High Consecrator and Chu Yang were waiting eagerly, the huge lotus finally bloomed completely. It had a radius of 100 feet. It illuminated the entire space, and made it look pure and holy. At the same time, Chu Yang felt that there seemed to be countless fairies in colorful clothes in the deep sky in front of him, holding flower baskets in their hands, singing and dancing. The sound of singing that filled the world seemed to resound in his soul. A feeling of incomparable tranquility arose spontaneously. Suddenly, 10 thick pillars of providence shot out from the lotus flower. It was unknown where they were going to shoot to. The sword spirit's voice sounded. Now intercept the fate energy. The array is operating at its peak now. As long as the celestial music is still being sung, every name you say will effectively intercept the fate energy. Chu Yang closed his eyes and said silently in his heart, Gu Duxing. That pillar of fate energy suddenly changed direction. Dong Wushang. Mo Tianji. GMO. Ao Xian. Luo Kadi. Rui Butong. Xie Danxiong. There were already 8 names. The sword spirit was thinking, who would be the sword tassel? Then he heard Chu Yang say, Mo Qinggu. The sword spirit hurriedly stopped him. No, you can't have the same surname. Chu Yang continued. Tan Tan. Chu Yang's voice was firm. Tan Tan might not be able to do it. The sword spirit panicked. Duke Yu. Zi Xieching. Meng Chaoran. Chu Yang couldn't stop chanting. Too much, too much. Too much. The sword spirit was so anxious that he stomped his feet. There's only one quota. How many have you chanted? Are you trying to empty out the big clans? Chu Yang ignored him and continued. Chu Feiling, Yang Ruolin, Chu Luer, Emolayer Wu Qianqian, Tai Butian, Huianaobua Jun Shiju, Feng Yuro, Yuling Shueba Lu Qing Ning Tianya. This master actually recited all the names that were related to him, those that he thought highly of, those that were friendly, in this limited celestial music. The sword spirit was stunned. He sat stiffly in the tribulation space, cold sweat all over his body. Chapter 1094. It's over, it's seriously over. This time it's really a mess. The sword spirit wanted to cry but had no tears. Tribulation sword master, tribulation sword. As the name suggested, it was a, "But how many have you read? You've read 18 names already. Too ruthless. You're too ruthless." Gu Miaoling. Chuyang finally read out the last name and stopped. The faint chanting in the air also abruptly disappeared at this moment. One by one, the destiny pillars separated and turned into rainbows, disappearing into the horizon. The sword spirit broke out in cold sweat, because when he read out the last two names, the destiny pillars that separated again were already very weak. This meant that the 10,000 years of destiny of the big clans had already been sucked dry by Chu Yang. This was definitely a huge move to remove the firewood from under the cauldron. It was also extremely cruel and vicious. Chu Yang recited the names of almost all the people who were related to him. He also recited the names of his brother's wives. He was practically afraid that he wouldn't be able to extract enough. At the same time, the Yi clan, at a place surrounded by mountains and rivers, surrounded by the Yi clan. It was where the ancestral grave of the Yi clan was located. When the Yi clan built the ancestral grave, they had invited a powerful expert to check the feng shui. This place had golden gates, jade ribbons, and golden dragons. It was a place where dragons soared and phoenixes danced. It had excellent feng shui. There were 3 dragons gathered underground, slightly protruding and higher than the surroundings. It was the land of kings. But at this moment, there was a sudden boom. A huge collapse suddenly appeared on the mountain behind the ancestral grave of the Yi clan. The whole mountain ridge seemed to have snapped from the ground. Thunder boomed from underground. Underground where no one could see. The earth veins suddenly broke and turned into nothingness. The golden and jade light flashed wildly and disappeared without a trace. Vaguely, it seemed as if a golden dragon had broken free from the shackles on its body. With a long roar, it rose into the sky and disappeared into the horizon. The Yi clan was in chaos. At the same time, the Xiao clan, Jia clan, Chun clan, Ling clan, and the other 8 big clans also had the same situation. Collapse. Collapse. Still collapse. The whole upper 3 heavens was in chaos. At an unknown place, Ning Tianya, covered in blood, was sitting cross-legged and recuperating. After being seriously injured by Wu Jiuecheng and the Dharma Supreme, the injuries Ning Tianya sustained this time could not be said to be light. Moreover, only Ning Tianya himself knew. Actually, the thing that had truly injured him was only that final sneak attack from Wu Jiuecheng's sword intent. He had originally thought that he had successfully created a facade to confuse them by retreating in defeat earlier. But he didn't expect Wu Jiuecheng to be so meticulous and so vicious in his actions. Moreover, Ning Tianya didn't expect Wu Jiuecheng to be able to use the sword intent of the Calamity Sword Master. This was something that no one would have thought of. Ning Tianya knew that at that time, the only option was to fight. Moreover, since they had already made up their minds to deal with Buluqing and the others, as long as he was unharmed, they would not make a move. Thus, he pretended to be defeated and fled. He was prepared to rush to Tianji City the moment they let down their guard. Together with Buluqing, they would beat them at their own game and kill them all. But he had never expected that Wu Jiuecheng would actually have such a backup plan. He actually managed to release an energy sword at that moment. This time, it made Supremacy Ning's attempt to be clever end up backfiring. The sword intent exclusive to the Master of the Calamity sword was incredibly powerful. This sword intent almost killed Ning Tianya. Supremacy Ning found this place to recuperate miserably, but the injuries inflicted by the sword intent healed extremely slowly. Currently, there were only signs of improvement. He was in the middle of circulating his energy when suddenly, an inexplicable force came through the air. Before Ning Tianya could react, it had already entered his body. In an instant, Ning Tianya felt his body lighten up. This force didn't help his injuries much, but Ning Tianya felt relaxed all of a sudden. Moreover, his potential seemed to have increased imperceptibly. His injuries were still painful, but he suddenly felt much better. Ning Tianya was shocked. He opened his eyes at once. Where did so much power of fate come from? Who is so kind as to transfer the power of fate to me? This is an incredibly troublesome matter, and it will even affect the karma between heaven and earth. Lower 3 heavens. In the Iron Cloud Imperial Palace, Tai Butian was lying on the bed, hugging her son to sleep. In a daze, she seemed to have had a dream. In the dream, she saw Chu Yang walking slowly to her with a smile on his face. With a point of his finger, a ray of white light entered her forehead. Tai Butian was jolted awake with a start. She felt extremely comfortable all over, and was at a loss as to what had happened. She murmured, "You Nemesis, I've dreamt of you again. It's just that this time, it's so real." Sigh. She let out a low sigh, all sleepiness gone. She bent down, and looked at her son's sleeping face. She couldn't help but miss him. Right at this moment, she felt that her body was a little strange. Her son was already more than a year old, and had been weaned. At this moment, she only felt her breast swell. Tai Butian looked down in shock, only to see milk oozing out of her breasts again. What's going on? The Empress' eyes were wide open as she stared at her own voluptuous breasts. She was in a daze. In different places, Belu Qing, Mo Qinggu, Yu Lingxue, Feng Yuro Wu Qianqian Chu Feiling Yang Rulan, also had a strange feeling at the same time. It seemed that they were different from before. Apart from Belu Qing and Feng, and Yu, who knew that this was the power of fate, and were even more shocked. The others were all at a loss. Zi Xiecheng also benefited from it. Feeling the increasingly abundant power of fate, Zi Xiecheng had a complicated look in her eyes. I originally wanted to leave here, and never see you again for the rest of my life. I didn't expect you to use such a method to increase my power of fate again. Although you only had good intentions, and didn't have any other intentions, you didn't know that for someone from beyond the heavens like me, owing others favors is one thing, but this illusory fate is one that I can't get rid of. From now on, even if we're in different parts of the world, my fate will be closely linked to you. Isn't this just killing me? Chu Yang's brothers had a different reaction from these people. Rui Butong and Dong Wushang were fighting and practicing. Suddenly, the two of them screamed at the same time, one throwing his saber, and the other throwing his sword. Dong Wushang grinned in surprise. Strange, we're in the middle of a battle. Why did we suddenly have a dream? Rui Butong was dumbfounded. I had a dream too. I dreamt of Boss. Boss slapped me with a sneaky smile. But this is a battle. God, what's going on? You had a dream too? The two of them stared at each other, dumbfounded. Then, they turned to look at the dark saber and sword that they had thrown on the ground, their faces full of disbelief. 3 days. In a mysterious place of space, a few people were sitting cross-legged and practicing with solemn expressions. Above everyone's head, there were 3 clouds of white mist that were almost solid, condensing and swaying, as if they were flower buds that were about to bloom. Beside them was an incomparably huge golden dragon. It was just that right now, more than half of the golden dragon's tail had already disappeared. They were Gu Duxing, Mo Tianji Luokadi, GMO, Aoshian, Xiedanxiong and the others. At the same time, the people who were fully focused on meditation suddenly seemed to have seen a scene at the same time. Chu Yang had a mysterious, sneaky smile on his face, as if he had done some kind of prank that was usually very satisfying. Using his hand to guide the clouds of white mist, he pointed a finger at his own forehead. Then the clouds of white mist suddenly disappeared into his body. At the same time, their bodies shook violently, and at the same time, then, they saw that the mist on the golden dragon's body suddenly became thicker, and the speed at which it released spiritual energy was actually twice as fast as usual. They opened their eyes at the same time, their eyes filled with confusion and longing. I dreamt of Boss. Gu Duxing frowned and muttered. He seemed to have given me something. Xiedanxiong too, a thoughtful look on his handsome face. I dreamt of it too. I dreamt of Boss pointing a finger at the top of my head. Yes, yes, yes. GMO jumped up and waved his arms and legs, shouting. I dreamt of it too, waha. Boss's face had the expression of a weasel who had successfully stolen a chicken. Waha, so disgusting. Mo Tianji's handsome face was filled with obvious excitement, and his eyes were sparkling. It was very different from his usual calmness. It was as if he was a completely different person. Tianji, could it be that you know what happened? Ao Xian was very careful, and when he saw Mo Tianji's expression, he immediately felt that something was very unusual. Mo Tianji's face was filled with excitement, and he suddenly became a little flustered. He even reached into his clothes in a panic, and took out a copper coin, shaking his head to signal everyone not to speak. Then, he suddenly activated the world-controlling divine technique. It was a solemn scene, and the copper coins flew into the air at the same time. Mo Tianji kept making mysterious and complicated hand gestures, and his expression was extremely serious. The next moment, the golden copper coins suddenly emitted a brilliant light in the air at the same time. Then they landed on the ground at the same time, and each coin was facing up. The moment they landed, the golden light was so brilliant that even with the cultivation of the brothers, they couldn't look directly at it. They only felt that the golden light in front of them was brilliant, as if they were in a palace of jade. Mo Tianji waited for the golden light to fade before he focused his gaze. With one look he was overjoyed. This is the power of fate. Mo Tianji's face was filled with uncontrollable excitement. Boss has succeeded. Do you know? Do you know? Ha ha ha. Gu Duxing and the others saw that Mo Tianji suddenly looked a little crazy, and they couldn't help but feel nervous. They hurriedly asked, "What's wrong? Tell us quickly." Mo Tianji took a deep breath, but it still didn't work, so he took another deep breath, and then took deep breaths for a while. Then, he turned his head and looked at the five of them with a burning gaze. He said, "This is the power of fate. Boss has extracted the fate of the big clans of the upper three heavens and injected it into our bodies." Chapter 1095. In other words, the luck of the big clans is now on the few of us. Mo Tianji said word by word. "Ah!" Everyone exclaimed in unison. This. Boss is really. Wahahaha, so cool. GMO and Luo Kudi couldn't help but be stunned. After a long while, they were overjoyed. Gu Duxing, Ao Xia Yin and Xia Dan Xiong were also overjoyed. Boss is still here. Still here. Still here. Gu Duxing laughed and tears suddenly flashed in his eyes. Mo Tianji smiled faintly. He felt that the blood in his heart was surging. It took him a while to calm down. After calming down, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The backlash of prying into the secrets of the heavens only took effect now. But Mo Tianji didn't care at all. If it was before, he might have lost his lifespan. But now, with the powerful luck that Chu Yang injected into him, Mo Tianji didn't care. Why would he care about this little backlash? We must hurry up and practice. Mo Tianji said word by word. Go out as soon as possible and kill our way up to the upper three heavens. Let's help Boss. Yes, Boss transferred our luck to us, but it doesn't mean that we are invincible from now on. Gu Duxing poured cold water on them as usual. Mo and Luo Kudi, who were a little proud and happy, said, "If the two of you don't work hard, you will be killed when you go up. Even if you are given 10 times more luck, you will only be a corpse. A pile of rotten meat." The brothers seemed to have formed a routine with each other. Mo Tianji pointed out the general direction and took charge of the overall situation. Gu Duxing led the people. Whether it was practicing martial arts or doing things, Gu Duxing was there to urge them. And the one who played the role of being cold and heartless was precisely Gu Duxing. When they met those who didn't cooperate, especially when GMO and Luo Kudi occasionally slacked off, what greeted them was a very crazy gale. Torrential rain. And Ao Xia Yin and Xia Dan Xiong acted as peacemakers, playing the role of a jack of all trades. If they really couldn't get out of the situation, the two of them would stand up. They would appear and turn the friction into nothing. It had to be said that such a combination was really wonderful. It was just that GMO and Luo Kudi had to suffer. Their aptitude couldn't be compared to the others, so it was inevitable that they would feel discouraged. But every time, Gu Duxing's thunderous storm would also come. Then the two of them competed in terms of their training capacity. It was so difficult for people to double their strength to catch up. Only in this way could the small groups advance together. Now, Gu Duxing was beating him as usual. GMO and Luo Kudi had bitter looks on their faces. She lowered her head and muttered, "I'm just happy for a while. Wait until we unify the heavens. There will be plenty of time for you to be happy." Gu Duxing said sternly, "Now, let's wait until we unify the heavens." Little by little, he couldn't even let himself get carried away. "What? You two want to spar with me?" Luo Kadi and GMO were startled. They shook their heads like rattledrums. Everyone began to practice, not mentioning anything else. Luo Kadi gritted his teeth. While no one was paying attention, he whispered into GMO's ear. Look, second brother Gu is getting more and more arrogant. He's acting like a tyrant. I really want to beat him into a pulp. GMO turned pale with fright. He cried out in an exaggerated manner. What? You want to beat second brother Gu into a softe? You're too crazy. Luo Kadi stared at GMO dumbfounded. He never thought that his closest comrade would betray him so cruelly at this moment. He was filled with grief and indignation. GMO, you betrayed me. Second brother Luo. Looks like your bones are itching. Gu Duxing had already flown over. With a black face, his iron fists and steel legs came down on his head. Luo Kadi didn't have time to dodge. He was knocked to the ground. What followed was a thunderous lesson. GMO looked at him with a clear conscience and smiled. Damn it, if I don't use you to let second brother Gu vent his anger, wouldn't he come looking for me? Humph, it's better for you to get beaten up than both of us getting beaten up together. Everyone felt a chill. Practice. Gu Duxing grabbed Luo Kadi, who looked like a pig, and threw him out. I'll castrate whoever talks again. Under Gu Duxing's high pressure. So a new round of practice began in full swing again. Chu Yang continued. That huge lotus flower continued to bloom in the sky, emitting a holy light. The world's providence continued to gather from all directions. No one knew. At this moment, there was already a fundamental earth-shaking change. Somewhere in the city. What's going on? Wu Jueqing, who was dressed in white, suddenly frowned. He looked at his palm. There was a cloud of rainbow-colored smoke was slowly converging. It seemed to want to gather but couldn't, yet didn't dissipate. The Dharma Supreme stood quietly in front of the window with his hands behind his back. Looking at the falling snow outside, he smiled and said, Brother Wu, what's wrong? It's very strange. Wu Jueqing looked at the colorful smoke in his palm and said in a low voice, This is very strange. This Chu Yang was obviously poison, but it dissipated, but not completely. If it was completely dissipated, I would have the confidence to confirm that he is the Tribulation Sword Master. But now what's going on? Wu Jueqing was deep in thought. After a while he slowly stood up and said, I'll go and take a look. The Dharma Supreme nodded. Go quickly and come back quickly. Right at this moment, just as Wu Jueqing was about to move, suddenly, there was a loud sound of mountains collapsing and earth cracking in Tianji City. The huge tremor caused the snow on the ground to rise several feet into the air. Countless houses collapsed with a loud crash. What's going on? The Dharma Supreme and Wu Jueqing looked at each other. The next moment, the Dharma Supreme summoned the person in charge of the Zhuge clan. After a while, an elder in hemp robes flew in. Lord Dharma Supreme, Lord Wu. Brother Tsangqiong, why have you come out personally? The Dharma Supreme looked at the elder in surprise. He smiled and said, Something has happened. What's so big that Brother Tsangqiong has to come out personally? The Dharma Supreme was surprised, and so was Wu Jueqing. This was because this old man was the stabilizing force of the Zhuge clan. The first-generation ancestor, the origin tribulation, the founder of the Zhuge clan, single-handedly led the Zhuge clan to power. Ancestor, Zhuge Tsangqiong. The elder ancestors of the various clans would never come out, unless it was a matter of life and death. Who would have thought that today's tremor would actually make the most stable Zhuge Tsangqiong of the various clans come out? How could the Dharma Supreme not be surprised? Something big has happened. Zhuge Tsangqiong's expression was grave. Lord Dharma Supreme, the spirit vein in the ancestral tomb of the Zhuge clan has suddenly broken. It has been completely extracted. The Tianqing Feng Shui inside. The coiled dragon jade belt has also suddenly broken. Not a single drop of the fate energy of the past 10,000 years is left. There's actually such a thing. Even with the Dharma Supreme's almost unparalleled composure, he couldn't help but stand up abruptly. An extremely shocked expression appeared on his face. Wu Jueqing's eyebrows also twitched violently a few times. Zhuge Tsangqiong looked at the Dharma Supreme's expression and said slowly, Lord Dharma Supreme must know the reason behind this? The Dharma Supreme laughed bitterly and said, That's right. the fate energy of the various clans. It has been passed down for 10,000 years. Not even a single drop is left. Such a situation has also happened in the past 10,000 years. He said word by word. That was when the Tribulation Sword Master killed his way up to the upper three heavens. Such a situation will only happen after a large clan is annihilated. A situation. The population is wiped out and the earth veins collapse. But, when a large clan like this is still at its peak, suddenly, there is no fate energy left. This has never happened in the past 10,000 years. Besides, the Tribulation Sword Master has obviously only obtained the fourth fragment. He definitely doesn't have the ability to extract or destroy everyone's fate energy. The fate energy of the clan. Such a thing can only happen after the Tribulation Sword Master has at least obtained the eighth fragment. Kinship. The three of them looked at each other and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. Wu Jueqing said slowly. Could it be that this is a flawless smokescreen? Zhuge Songqiong took a deep breath and said, Lord Dharma Supreme, please contact the other clans. Large clans had always been in contact. But if it was the fastest to send a message, and it was the Dharma Supreme's communication jade, Zhuge Songqiong was also extremely smart. When the Dharma Supreme said that, he thought of the other clans. If there was only the Zhuge clan, then, the matter must have happened in Tianji City, and it might not be too serious. But if all the large clans encountered such a thing at the same time, then there was only one possibility. And that was, the Tribulation Sword Master has already been killed. He has gone up to the upper three heavens, and he has at least obtained the eighth fragment of the Tribulation Sword. This is impossible, Wu Jueqing said with certainty. The fact that the Tribulation Sword Master has obtained the eighth fragment is pure nonsense. No, he has obtained the sword intent, but he can't even obtain the fifth fragment. Even if he did, it would still be a dead fragment. How could he have obtained the eighth fragment? The Dharma Supreme hurriedly took out his communication jade and prepared to send a message to ask. However, before he could send out the question, his communication jade suddenly glowed brightly. One message after another. They appeared on the communication jade. Looks like things are not good. The Dharma Supreme laughed bitterly. Wu Jueqing and Zhuge Songqiong both leaned over to take a look. Just looking at the first message, both of their expressions changed. The Yi clan ancestral grave has been destroyed. Earth meridians destroyed. Spirit meridians all gone. Fate energy all gone. This was the first message. There was almost no need to look at the other messages. They could be sure that the other messages were exactly the same as this one. It was just that the surname was changed. Looks like the large clans were all in trouble. The Dharma Supreme's expression was extremely dark. Wu Jueqing's expression was also dark, his eyes flashing. Zhuge Songqiong stood still for a moment before he said calmly, I'll go back and deal with it. As he said that, he turned and walked out. At the door, he stopped and said word by word, Looks like our large clans must make peace with the Tribulation Sword Master this time. His tribulation will not rest until he is dead. He must kill tribulation and extract fate energy to continue the clan's legacy. Otherwise, the extinction of the large clans is right in front of us. With that, he strode away without looking back. The Dharma Supreme took a deep breath and said, Brother Wu, what do you think? Wu Jueqing's eyes flashed. When Zhuge Songqiong was far away, he said in a low voice, It might not be the doing of the Tribulation Sword Master. As tribulations, you and I should know that the Tribulation Sword Master probably doesn't have such capabilities now. Could it be the medicine banquet? Chapter 1096. Wu Jueqing smiled lightly and said, However, even if this was not done by the Tribulation Sword Master, it is also a good thing that the big clans want to fight to the death with the Tribulation Sword Master. So don't expose it. The Dharma Supreme smiled. Brother Wu, you worry too much. Zhuge Songqiong also didn't say that this was the doing of the Tribulation Sword Master. However, no matter who is behind this, the fate energy that has been lost cannot be recovered. The only way is to extract it from tribulation. Only then can fate continue. That is why there is the saying of extracting fate energy against the heavens. Because even if it is the will of the heavens, as long as the fate energy of tribulation is extracted, it can still be continued. Wu Jueqing was stunned. He said, "Yes, I have been a villain for nothing." As he spoke, he laughed. "Let's go." The Dharma Supreme smiled lightly. The two of them, one in black and one in white, floated out of the door at the same time. The Dharma Supreme directly rose into the air and slowly left like a black cloud. Wu Jueqing, on the other hand, turned around and melted into the world of ice and snow, disappearing without a trace. He still used the method of concealing his tracks and went forward stealthily. The two of them were still one in the light and one in the dark. After all, there was still that unfathomable expert in the city. How would Wu Jueqing dare to let his guard down? The medicine banquet. The high priest was focused on the huge lotus above Chu Yang's head. The fate energy from all directions was still gathering. The lotus had already started to slowly change color, from the pure white to blue, and now towards red. Once the colors changed and turned back into a colorless white, the heaven-nourishing jade could be refined. At this critical juncture, the sound of the wind suddenly came. A voice outside said, "Lord Dharma Supreme, no one is allowed to enter during the medicine banquet." A slow voice said, "No matter. I am here to pay a visit to the high priest and the valley master. There are some matters regarding the medicine banquet that I need to ask." The supreme martial artist guarding the door said, "Please wait for a moment, Lord Dharma Supreme. I will go and report." The high consecrator heard it clearly and was instantly enraged. He stormed out angrily. "What's the matter?" The moment the high priest came out, he asked the Dharma Supreme. His nose was not his nose and his eyes were not his eyes. His expression was extremely ugly. For the medicine banquet this time around, one of the large clans was chased back by the Dharma Supreme, and thus became 8. The Ling clan was eliminated, and thus became 7. There were also 2 pharmacists from the law enforcement officers. But just like the other 7 clans, they cheated and substituted one for another. But now, even his body had stiffened. The medicine banquet was almost ruined. The high priest had a belly full of anger. If he didn't vent it on the Dharma Supreme, who else could he vent it on? At this moment, the valley master of the medicine valley also hurriedly came out from the great heaven reversing array. Frowning, he asked, "Lord Dharma Supreme, what's the matter?" The Dharma Supreme was not angered by these 2 people's provocation. Instead, he smiled and said, "I am here to ask if the medicine banquet's extraction of fortune from the pharmacists will affect the fortune of the big clans?" "Nonsense. Nonsense." The high priest and the valley master opened their mouths to refute at the same time, spitting out so much saliva that it almost washed the Dharma Supreme's face. Firstly, it's used to absorb alchemists' luck and gather them to overturn the heavens. It's not extracted, the valley master said with a solemn face. After the medicine banquet, this portion of luck will still have to be returned. Secondly, the medicine banquet, from a certain perspective, is for the benefit of the big clans. How can it affect the big clans? Thirdly, when the array was set up, the medicine valley only provided the array blueprint. The array was completely completed by the big clans and law enforcement officers. Whether or not the fortune of the big clans will be extracted, how can we, the medicine valley, decide? Even if we do, it's the big clans seeking their own deaths. Fourthly, if the Dharma Supreme does not believe, you can check the array. The valley master said firmly, "Lord Dharma Supreme also has the array blueprint. If you find any flaws in the array, please go and settle the score with the person who set up the array." The Dharma Supreme smiled bitterly. "I'm just asking. I would also like to ask Lord Dharma Supreme." The high priest had already lost his patience. The people sent by the big clans and law enforcement officers have all used the soul transfer technique. I wonder what Lord Dharma Supreme thinks about this matter? The Dharma Supreme's gaze instantly turned sharp. There's actually such a thing? How dare they? The high priest sneered. The medicine banquet this time was almost ruined by these greedy people. I don't know who was the one who ate too much lard and lost his mind. With his short-sighted eyes, he came up with such an idiotic idea and did such a despicable thing that could end one's bloodline. They should implicate their entire clan and deserve to die. Lord Dharma Supreme, please investigate thoroughly. The Dharma Supreme's temples twitched. He glared at the high priest and said furiously, "What a bastard! I will definitely investigate to the bottom." With that, he left in a huff and said, "Let me see if there are any flaws in the array." He left hurriedly. The Valley Master looked at the high priest, and both of them smiled at each other. He sent a telepathic message. How does it feel to scold the Dharma Supreme to his face? The high priest's anger dissipated completely. His old face smiled like a chrysanthemum, and he nodded vigorously. Great. Both of them were not fools. Who else could command the law enforcement officers and the big clans at the same time other than the Dharma Supreme? Now the high priest pointed at the monk and scolded him as a bald donkey, venting his anger. The Dharma Supreme walked one round around the array and did not find anything unusual. He stood at the top and observed for a while, but also did not find anything wrong. He directly disrupted his divine sense and used his original divine sense to check the fate energy, but did not find anything extracted from the big clans. He only saw that the fate energy of countless pharmacists in the world was converging here continuously. Every trace was very weak. The Dharma Supreme shook his head and finally landed. "How is it?" The high priest rolled his eyes and asked. "There's no problem." The Dharma Supreme frowned. But the ancestral tombs of the big clans suddenly collapsed and no one was spared. The fate energy of all the clans was all gone. What is going on? Ah, there's such a thing. The high priest and the Valley Master looked at each other. Then the high priest said, "We don't know about that. Besides, this matter has nothing much to do with the Medicine Valley." "Oh right, Lord Dharma Supreme. The fate energy of the Medicine Valley has not been completely extracted, right?" The Dharma Supreme's gaze was deep. "Such a thing did not happen to the Medicine Valley." "That's good. That's good." The high priest and the Valley Master were beaming with joy, as if relieved of a heavy burden. The Dharma Supreme could not stay any longer, and left in a huff. Inside, the two old men looked at each other and smiled. Both of them blew their beards loudly and laughed silently, winking at each other happily. The great heaven-turning array. A cloud of mist. Wu Jueqing's white figure suddenly appeared under Chu Yang's stone pillar. Looking up at the huge lotus above, he murmured, "The fate energy lotus is almost complete. If it is destroyed now, the 1,000-year plan will be ruined in an instant." She frowned and floated up to Chu Yang. Then, she looked at Chu Yang's face. There was pain on Chu Yang's face. There were also faint 7 colors gathering and dispersing at times. However, they did not completely disperse, nor did they completely gather. Wu Jueqing was puzzled. It was obvious that he was poisoned and had not been cured. However, it had already greatly delayed and controlled the poison. What was the reason? He saw that Chu Yang was holding a small jade bottle with the purple crystal core in his hands. Could the reason be from this small bottle? Wu Jueqing frowned. The jade bottle with the purple crystal core opened silently. A fresh fragrance came out from inside. It actually had the rhythm of life. No wonder you could temporarily cure my poison. So you have the spiritual spring water in you. Wu Jueqing was relieved. He actually smiled slightly and murmured, "Since it's not the Tribulation Sword Master, it seems like I can only deal with it after the medicine banquet." With a flash, he disappeared without a trace. Wu Jueqing had already left for a while. Chu Yang's eyes were still closed, but a thin layer of sweat had quietly seeped out of his forehead. He did not expect this guy to really come. This situation was really dangerous. If not for the fact that the medicine banquet was to deal with the Tribulation Sword Master, he would probably have turned into dust with just a casual slap. Wu Jueqing had just left when the high priest and the Valley Master came in and looked at the lotus above Chu Yang's head from afar. Both of them looked solemn. It had already changed to the 5th color. "Are the preparations almost done?" asked the Valley Master. "Almost done." The high priest's face was solemn and serious. "When it changes to the 8th color and has enough fate energy, we can activate the ultimate form of the great heaven-turning formation. We can draw in the primordial energy and gather the 1,000-year fate energy of the pharmacists to start refining medicine. At that time, all the supreme martial artists will need to come in and do it at the same time. They will be divided into batches and throw 810,000 elixirs into the lotus. The lotus will change color again and become the lotus of heavenly mandate. At the last moment, you and I will use the momentum to stir the elixirs and gather the power of fate energy. The lotus of heavenly mandate will immediately react and merge with the heaven and earth. It will adjust yin and yang and gather the wind and clouds. Then we can refine the heaven-nourishing jade. The Valley Master nodded deeply and let out a long breath. The medicine banquet this time is finally a success. The process is really unbearable to look back on. The high priest snorted and said, "This time it's all thanks to Chu Yang. Valley Master, can't you see that he is still poisoned at this moment? He is using his willpower to support himself and not collapse. We must thank him properly for this success." The Valley Master nodded. "Of course." Then he said, "Since the outcome is decided, I can now go out and announce that the champion of the medicine banquet is Chu Yang." The high priest didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Everyone else is dead. If he is not the champion, who else can it be? The Valley Master laughed and turned to leave. Both of them were relaxed at this moment. But they knew very well that the danger of this medicine banquet had completely exceeded the sum of the previous 1,000 years. But some things couldn't be said openly after all. Outside, the snow was still falling. On the ground, there was another thick layer of snow on top of the foundation of the original snow. But there were still many people looking forward to the final announcement of the champion. The voice of the Valley Master of the Medicine Valley rang out at this moment. The finals of the medicine banquet have come to an end. The champion of this year's medicine banquet, the #1 pharmacist in the world, is... Chapter 1097. The voice of the Valley Master of the Medicine Valley spread far and wide, and even the snowflakes fluttering in the air turned into powder. Ah, wahaha! A red shadow jumped up happily from afar, dancing and somersaulting on the top of a big tree. Chu Yang succeeded. Wahaha! Mo Qinggu was extremely happy. Her beloved brother Chu Yang won the medicine banquet that all the pharmacists in the heavens competed for. Mo Qinggu was even happier than becoming a supreme martial artist herself. For a moment, the little girl was so happy that her heart was about to explode. She grabbed Bu Liuqing's sleeve and laughed and jumped. "Master, Chu Yang succeeded. He succeeded." Bu Liuqing narrowed his eyes and wanted to say something, but he rolled his eyes and said, "How did it become Chu Yang? Not brother Chu Yang?" Mo Qinggu was embarrassed. "Master, you're so annoying." She stomped her feet and turned around, but she still couldn't help but feel happy. After being shy for a while, she cheered again. In the other direction, Han Sharan laughed heartily and was extremely happy. The Southeast law enforcement officers could finally hold their heads high this time. Some people were happy, while others were frustrated. Chu Yang won the championship, and the big clans were all a little unhappy, especially a few elders, who were even more nervous. Chu Yang won the championship, which meant that a part of the heaven-nourishing jade would fall into his hands. That was a good item that could reverse life and death. The 8-second grandmasters sighed at the same time, and turned to leave in the wind and snow. They were ready to take action. If they really couldn't do it, then they could only kill Chu Yang and ambush Zi Xiecheng together? In the heaven-turning array, the lotus on top of Chu Yang's head was already faintly turning yellow. Yellow was the 8th color. The 9th color was pink. After pink, it was white. The high priest stared at the lotus above Chu Yang's head without blinking. He held his breath and clenched his fists tightly. He was waiting for the moment when it turned yellow to activate its ultimate form. At this moment, the high priest only felt his heart thumping and his mouth dry. Finally, the color of the lotus suddenly turned yellow. The high priest couldn't help but be excited. He shouted with a red face, "Open!" He gave the order. All the supreme martial artists outside attacked together. They all slammed their palms into the ground. This palm strike was different from any other palm strike. Instead, it was formed purely from the life energy of the Supremes. Even the snowflakes on the uppermost layer did not tremble when the palm struck the ground. However, the vigorous power had already silently gathered underground. Then it abruptly converged together, converging at a certain point underground. That point was where the ultimate eye of the formation was located. In an instant, an illusory, pure white lotus flower slowly bloomed from an unknown location underground and slowly rose up. The high consecrator leaped and arrived in front of Chu Yang. He reminded him in a low voice. Chu Yang, release all your defenses and prepare to draw the primordial energy into your body. Refine the heaven-nourishing jade. Chu Yang nodded heavily. Then he let go of all his defenses, with the power of heaven and earth to clear the top. The next moment, that huge lotus floated up from the ground and dispersed into nothingness. It then fused with the lotus on top of Chu Yang's head with a schwa sound. The lotus on top of Chu Yang's head issued a slight trembling sound and suddenly doubled in size. Then, the lotus turned from yellow to pink. From the heart of the lotus, 3 streams of blazing white aura suddenly shot out. They broke through the formation and spiraled into the sky, turning into an inseparable stream that rushed into the clouds. The white light disappeared without a trace. Then, a mysterious chant sounded in the sky, as if it came from the deepest part of everyone's heart. The chant became louder and louder, more and more intense. In the end, it finally filled the whole world. Just at the peak, it suddenly stopped. At the same time, a purple aura, mysterious, ancient and powerful, appeared from the clouds far away. It broke through the snowflakes and fell straight into the heaven-turning formation. It connected the heaven and earth tightly. Waves of mysterious aura were aimed at the top of Chu Yang's head and rushed down fiercely. It's coming, it's coming. The sword spirit was fully focused. He held the calamity sword in his hand, ready to intercept this purple spiritual energy at any time. This was the most original source of energy in the whole world. The source of all life. It was already a shocking move that the medicine banquet could be brought down. It was impossible to intercept it. No one could absorb such a vast amount of energy in the form of a human body. It could only return to the sky after the medicine banquet, which was equivalent to a trip to the human world. But the sword spirit was different. The sword spirit did not belong to the human body, the heavenly Tao in the netherworld. And the calamity sword in his hand was even more mysterious and powerful. Together with Chu Yang, the sword master, the sword spirit had the right to intercept this primordial violet vapor. Although it was still a little risky, the sword spirit would definitely not let go of such an opportunity. This was really a blessing from the heavens. Letting it go was a sin. The purple spiritual energy surged into his head. Chu Yang only felt that his spirit and consciousness were being cleansed at the same time. His whole body was ironed, as if he was soaking in a hot spring when he was exhausted to the extreme. Wherever the purple aura passed, countless small black stains appeared on the surface of Chu Yang's skin. Those were the impurities in his body. Under the cleansing of such purple aura, all of it was expelled. If not for the calamity sword, the cleansing of his body, and the removal of impurities, would have been the greatest benefit this #1 pharmacist had. The purple aura entered his body. The next moment, the sword spirit started to get busy. He suddenly let go of the calamity sword. The calamity sword scattered into scattered light and entered Chu Yang's meridians. The sword spirit sat down cross-legged and attached all his spirit power to the calamity sword that had already entered Chu Yang's meridians. The next moment, the surging primordial violet vapor swept over from the top of Chu Yang's head with an overwhelming force. His meridians immediately turned into an overwhelming wave of violet vapor. The calamity sword trembled slightly, as if an extremely thirsty person had jumped into a clear and sweet lake and gulped it down. The sword spirit's spirit power was constantly channeled, constantly extracting the violet vapor that the calamity sword had swallowed and pouring it into the calamity space. The speed of the movement was so fast that it could be channeled back and forth dozens of times in an instant. It was like a rat in a huge oil depot, diligently and tirelessly stealing soybean oil from its rat hole. Furthermore, the opportunity could not be missed. At this moment, the sword spirit was using all his strength to steal crazily. The result of such a theft was that the primordial violet vapor entered Chu Yang's head and went down in order. It should have circled around his body and entered the huge lotus of heavenly mandate from the gushing spring. It should have ripened and completed the refinement of the heaven-nourishing jade. However, The sword spirit's desperate theft actually caused the primordial violet vapor to not leak out for a long time. The high priest stared intently at the lotus of heavenly mandate and observed the progress of the primordial violet vapor. After seeing no reaction for a long time, he couldn't help but feel strange. What's going on? Why is the primordial violet vapor so slow this time? The old man muttered to himself. Everything was happening inside Chu Yang's body. Even with his fiery golden eyes, the high priest couldn't see it. Who would have thought that the hard work of him, the big clans and law enforcement officers for 1,000 years would be used by someone in secret? The sword spirit was desperately stealing the violet vapor. However, there was really too much of such spiritual energy. After a short while, after it got used to Chu Yang's meridians, it completely drowned the calamity sword and the sword spirit in purple waves. The calamity sword and the sword spirit were like reefs sinking to the bottom of a crazy tide. Above their heads, the violet vapor flowed past endlessly. The sword spirit maintained a high speed of theft. It displayed a theft technique that even Rui Budong's two famous teachers would be shocked to death. It kept extracting, circulating, putting down, returning again above Chu Yang's head. The primordial violet vapor was crazily pouring down. Finally, Chu Yang felt a heat in the soles of his feet. Two streams of violet vapor poured out from the soles of his feet and poured into the lotus of heavenly mandate. It's finally out. The high priest looked at the violet vapor and finally heaved a sigh of relief. Damn it, it's even more difficult than a woman giving birth. The violet vapor poured into the lotus of heavenly mandate endlessly. The lotus instantly turned completely pink. Then it slowly turned pure white petal by petal. The high priest clapped his hands and shouted, "All of you come in." At his command, 10 supreme martial artists came in at the same time. Don't move. Everyone guard a pile of herbs and listen to my command. The high priest was so nervous that he was stuttering. He stared at the lotus of heavenly mandate. As every petal of the lotus turned pure white, his mouth opened wider and wider. At this moment, he didn't even have the time to breathe. The next moment, the primordial violet vapor poured in. The last lotus petal turned pure white. The entire lotus suddenly emitted a dazzling holy white light. Then, it started to spin slowly. Slowly it spun faster and faster. Slowly, the shape of the lotus could no longer be seen clearly. Swoosh! All the pharmacist's fate energy entered the lotus petal in an orderly manner at this moment. Do it! Under extreme nervousness, the high priest's voice became that of a duck. He gave the order like a chicken waiting to be slaughtered. The 10 supreme martial artists lifted the piles of spirit herbs beside them at the same time. They rose into the air and were about to throw them into the rapidly spinning lotus. After putting them in, they immediately came down and picked up another pile. They did this a few times. All 81 types of spirit herbs entered the lotus of heavenly mandate. Not even a single bubble appeared. Furthermore, it seemed to have completely disappeared. The lotus flashed. At this moment, the colors changed back and forth continuously. It was as if a huge neon light was spinning in the sky. A strong fragrance spread out fiercely. The lotus of heavenly mandate was finally completed. Chapter 1098. The Valley Master and High Priest flew above the lotus and focused their attention on the direction of the lotus. The next moment, the two of them shouted in unison and struck out with their white rods. The two of them stood opposite each other in the air. As the lotus of heavenly mandate rotated, their bodies also rotated and instantly turned into two shadows. The space of tribulation was already filled with purple energy. The dense purple chi seemed to have condensed into a substance. At this moment, all the medicinal herbs seemed to have been reborn as they grew rapidly. The spiritual spring water gurgled and actually started to turn into a faint milky white color. The white spiritual energy in the space of tribulation was first compressed and then directly expelled, disappearing without a trace. The entire space of tribulation became a heaven of purple energy, and the sword spirit was still tirelessly moving it here. Continuously moving it here. In the air above the lotus of heavenly mandate, the Valley Master and High Priest were already dizzy from the rotation, and were trying their best. The two old men were extremely puzzled. Fuck. What's going on? In the past, the heaven-nourishing jade would be formed after 100 rounds in 8,000 years. Why is it that after more than 3,000 rounds this time, the heaven-nourishing jade is still not formed? This is really, really strange. How could the two of them know that originally, it would at most take a few hundred rounds this time? But the problem was that there was an extra super thief. Almost 1/3 of the primordial purple vapor was taken away. The power of heaven and earth was seriously insufficient. They could only use time to make up for it. And using time to make up for it, the two old men were rotated a little more. Not just a little more, but a lot more. Finally, the primordial purple vapor above Chu Yang's head slowly weakened, in the center of the lotus. Then, a sparkling and translucent object was slowly lifted up from the ground. Slowly, it reached a height of 10 feet above the lotus. It was like jade but not jade. It was like substance but not substance. It was like liquid but not liquid. All in all, Chu Yang felt that it was somewhat similar to the mysterious ice jade ointment of the great miracle medicine. However, it was much more powerful than the mysterious ice jade ointment. The next moment, the lotus of heavenly mandate suddenly disappeared and turned into a rainbow light. He had entered this strange place. Then, this strange object suddenly emitted a bright light. It lit up the entire hall. The heaven-nourishing jade was finally formed. It slowly floated in the air. In the sky, the purple gas from the top to the bottom suddenly disappeared. A cloud of dense purple chi separated from the heaven-nourishing jade. It was as if it was escaping, moving at lightning speed. Battered and exhausted, he rushed out of the hall and disappeared into the boundless void. This is too frightening. Damn, there's actually someone here who's waiting to take us in. The high priest and the valley lord fell to the ground at the same time with a thud. The two old men shook their heads and felt dizzy for a long time before they came back to their senses. He was really dizzy. The high priest stood up, but he still felt dizzy as he walked around in a circle. He sat down on the ground again, panting heavily. Holding his head, he cursed. Damn it, it's really evil this time. I was spun around 13,000 times. Even with my supreme martial artist cultivation, my head almost exploded from the spinning. The valley master smiled bitterly, supporting himself with one hand. She tried her best to endure the dizziness and nausea. Panting, she said, You're still counting? The high priest spat and said, How can I not count? Valley Lord, if you do this again next time, let second brother do it. I won't do it even if you beat me to death. If I do it again, I'll definitely lose my life, the valley master laughed. The two of them calmed down. Finally, they stood up and could raise their heads. Looking at the spinning heaven-nourishing jade, the valley master sighed. The heaven-nourishing jade this time is completely perfect. It was incomparably perfect, and why was it so big? It's more than twice as big as the previous ones. The high priest also looked at it and frowned. It's big indeed. Why do I feel like it's only half complete? Missing half. It's always a full circle. Why is it missing half this time? It's only a semicircle? I really don't know about that. But although it's a semicircle this time, it's enough. The valley master said with relief. Quickly let this little brother come down. Go and cut the heaven-nourishing jade. Leave the part that's used to nourish the heavens, and leave a small piece for the valley lord. The rest are all for Chu Yang. This is the rule for nourishing the heavens. The high priest was a little reluctant. Giving him so much. This little guy is so lucky. This is what they deserve. The valley lord said solemnly. The high priest smiled embarrassedly. I'm just kidding. In a place that no one knew about, in the tribulation space. Good stuff, good stuff. The sword spirit held the semicircle lovingly. Although he was so tired that he was panting, he was beaming with joy. If the valley master and the high priest saw this, they would definitely be shocked. The thing in the sword spirit's hands was the heaven-nourishing jade. Exactly half of it. Even Chu Yang didn't know how the sword spirit managed to cut half of the heaven-nourishing jade in front of everyone. At this moment, he was asking in the tribulation space. The moment Chu Yang entered the tribulation space, what greeted him was the almost liquid-like primordial violet vapor. He choked and almost couldn't breathe. The purple energy was so pure that it made Chu Yang choke on his breath. It was as if he had suddenly swallowed a mouthful of sticky rice and stuffed his windpipe. Cough, cough, cough. Chu Yang was shocked. So much primordial violet vapor? The sword spirit said proudly. When you were performing the empowerment, I stole it. Halfway through, I stole enough violet vapor to improve the tribulation space and completely change its nature. But to be on the safe side, I stole half more. With so much violet vapor, it would be a waste not to steal it. Chu Yang fainted. No wonder I felt that the violet vapor empowerment didn't have any other benefits other than expelling impurities. Chu Yang said impatiently. So you stole it all here. You still want to absorb it directly? The sword spirit looked at Chu Yang, as if he was looking at an alien. Aren't you afraid that you'll explode? Chu Yang rubbed his nose. What's going on? He pointed at the heaven-nourishing jade. How did you cut it? Chu Yang was extremely surprised. The sword spirit snorted and said, Isn't this a piece of cake? Now that I'm moving at full speed, even the Dharma Supreme may not be able to catch my shadow. How did you see it? After bragging for a while, he said, The moment the heaven-nourishing jade was formed and the violet vapor dissipated, I made my move. The sword spirit hugged the heaven-nourishing jade tiredly and snorted. How can the heaven-nourishing jade refined by the tribulation sword master not even have half of it? That's too easy for them. With this piece of jade, so many lives will be saved. After he finished speaking, only then did he carry the heaven-nourishing jade and place it beside the divine bone golden hand. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. Outside, the high consecrator soared into the air. Hugging the heaven-nourishing jade in his arms, he descended slowly. Just this hug already made him feel comfortable all over. The Valley Master flew up personally and came to Chu Yang's side. He said gently, Brother Chu, the refining of the heaven-nourishing jade has been completed. You can rest for a while. At the same time, this old man will take a look at how to get rid of your poison. Chu Yang was interrogating the sword spirit when he heard this. He hurriedly returned his consciousness to his body and said, Thank you, Valley Master. The Valley Master was afraid that Chu Yang would be affected after being poisoned. He directly carried him and floated down. With a face full of gratitude, he said, You've worked hard. Then, he diagnosed the 7 shades poison in Chu Yang's body. He frowned and said, Brother Chu, this poison of yours, although it is temporarily suppressed, however, it is still a serious problem. If you use the heaven-nourishing jade to absorb it, it will be a little overkill. Let me slowly think of a way. Chu Yang revealed a generous smile and said, The heaven-nourishing jade has a great responsibility. For the heavens, for all living beings in the world, for the common people, and for the fortune of all the pharmacists in the past 1,000 years. The heaven-nourishing jade should be kept for greater use. The Valley Master was filled with deep veneration. Little brother is indeed chivalrous. Such a character does not disgrace the title of #1 pharmacist in the world. Chu Yang said fearfully, I was just lucky. In terms of pharmacology, I am far inferior to the Valley Master and the High Priests. Such an honor. How can I dare to accept it? The Valley Master admired him more and more. Such a pure and flawless young hero. No matter what, he had to get close to him. He said, Little brother, since you are the first and have successfully cultivated the heaven-nourishing jade, you are fully deserving of this title. Not only that, from today onwards, you are the Medicine Valley's High Priest. You are ranked 7th High Priest. As he said, he took out a jade token. Brother Chu, this is your identity token. As long as you have this, you can enter and leave the Medicine Valley at will. You have the right to enjoy all the resources of the Medicine Valley. Chu Yang received it with a look of reverence and awe. At this moment, the High Priest finally came out. He held a purple crystal jade core plate with 5 palm-sized pieces of heaven-nourishing jade on it. He handed it to Chu Yang with some heartache. Brother Chu, this is the heaven-nourishing jade you deserve. Chu Yang was very honest. He said awkwardly, This is not good. Why don't the 3 of us divide it equally? The High Priest was very happy at once. He patted Chu Yang's shoulder. Nonsense, this belongs to you alone. The 2 of us did not do anything. Why should we divide it equally? Besides, the Medicine Valley has its own reserves. If Chu Yang had accepted it without saying anything, the high priest would inevitably be heartbroken. But now that Chu Yang said this, he immediately felt his heart warm up. Chu Yang looked awkwardly as the high priest stuffed the heaven-nourishing jade into his arms. He spoke incoherently, his face red. "This is not good. This is not good." This expression was simply that of an innocent little virgin. The high priest stuffed it into Chu Yang's arms without any explanation. Then he patted his shoulder. "Brother Chu, when you are done, you must come to the Medicine Valley for a visit." Chu Yang said sincerely, "Of course I must go." After giving some instructions, Chu Yang reluctantly took his leave, saying that he would think of a way to cure the poison and try not to use the heaven-nourishing jade as much as possible. The Valley Master urged him to come to the Medicine Valley for a visit. Then, he explained some of the benefits of being the top pharmacist, including the status of a law enforcement officer and a doctor, which was equivalent to that of a law enforcement master. In short, all these benefits would be fulfilled after the heaven-nourishing jade core was repaid. Chu Yang beamed with joy as he agreed. Then he walked out in high spirits. Behind him, the high priest and the Valley Master looked at his back view. They stroked their beards and sighed in relief. What a smart and sensible child. Little did they know that the person they had just sent away was the most black-hearted, and the one who had benefited the most. In this way, almost 2/3 of the heaven-nourishing jade had fallen into Chu Yang's hands. Also, almost 1/3 of the primordial violet vapor had been taken by him. This small fortune that he had made in secret had already made him a little embarrassed. To be continued. Chapter 1099. When Chu Yang walked out of the sky-turning array, he still felt like he was in a dream. Outside, it was snowing heavily. The entire world was a vast expanse. The dancing snowflakes hit Chu Yang's face, giving him a tranquil and ethereal feeling. He didn't use any martial arts, but just trudged out of the snow at the speed of an ordinary person. In such a hazy place, Chu Yang's mind was exceptionally clear. After thinking about what happened here, he recalled Mo Qingwu's strange dream, and that mysterious top talent in his previous life, Shui Leihan. There must be a connection, Chu Yang thought to himself. From afar, a few gazes looked at him at the same time. Bu Liuqing's eyes were like an eagle's, staring at Chu Yang, who was trudging through the snow. Even Bu Liuqing couldn't see clearly from a distance of 10,000 feet. He could only lock onto Chu Yang's position with his aura. Chu Yang got first place. Now that he came out, it proved that he had the heaven-nourishing jade. There would definitely be people who wanted the heaven-nourishing jade. Therefore, Chu Yang was in a very dangerous situation now. On the other side, Feng Yuro and Yu Lingxue stood side by side in the snow. Their expressions were somewhat complicated. The heaven-nourishing jade has finally been refined. Feng Yuro seemed to be mumbling to herself. Yes. Yu Lingxue's handsome face flashed with a trace of solemnity. For 100,000 years, all the Dharma Supremes have given their all in order to assist the Tribulation Sword Master. If the seniors knew that only the two of us are left among the law enforcement officers, and the rest have already given up on this goal, how would they feel? How would they feel? Will they cry at the same time? But no matter what, we have to adhere to Master's wishes. Master's last instructions before he died were to uphold the mission of the law enforcement officers and assist the Tribulation Sword Master to make this continent peaceful. Feng Yuro smiled and said in the wind and snow, "The nourishing of the heavens will begin 3 days later." Yu Lingxue looked up and removed his defense, letting the cold snowflakes stick to his face. Feeling the chill, he said, "We will take action at that time." He paused and said in a heavy tone, "It's also possible for us. This battle will be the last battle. Roer, are you scared?" Feng Yuro took a deep breath. She looked at her husband gently and said with a hint of guilt, "I'm not afraid. It's just that, what I regret the most is that I couldn't leave behind a male and female bloodline for you." Yu Lingxue smiled. "Even if it's Sun Wandai, but many years later, they all return to dust. Roer, look, there are many people in this world with many surnames. However, after 100,000 years, there are already many surnames. It could no longer be seen on this continent. Because they don't have daughters, or perhaps they only have daughters and no sons. Once they marry, they follow their husbands. Thus, they don't have the surname of their maiden family. Only large clans can pass it down. But slowly, as the world changes, large clans will also disappear. Lingxue said indifferently. So what if he disappeared? Now it's gone. Even if they disappeared after tens of millions of years, they would still disappear. The death of a person was like the extinguishment of a lamp. Even if there was another world, it no longer belonged to this place. Why bother? Feng Yuro listened in a daze. Her eyes reddened. I didn't think so much. I just want to have a child of my own. Lingxue heaved a long sigh and said, If we don't die today, you will have a child. The two of them leaned against each other. Feng Yuro slowly snuggled into her husband's arms and remained silent. She enjoyed the peace and quiet before the great battle. Chu Yang walked out step by step. Another 300 feet, and he would be out of the Medicine Valley's perimeter. Around him, there was a strong aura. Those were the experts of the large clans preparing to strike. Chu Yang was long prepared for this. A mocking smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. I know what you want to do. But if I can't even think of this if you succeed, then what am I doing? Somewhere far away, a long roar suddenly sounded, breaking through the air. The wind and snow were shattered from the air. The wind and snow in front suddenly rumbled. A white figure, like a hurricane, galloped over in the wind and snow. Its speed was as fast as the wind and lightning. Its entire body was wrapped in wind and snow. Its figure and face could not be seen clearly. In fact, no aura was emitted. Before anyone could react, this white figure was already 300 feet in front of Chu Yang. Far away, Buluqing shouted in shock and anger. Not good. Suddenly, he kicked off, and his body shot out like an arrow. In the air he roared, How dare you, coward! Sword light shot out wildly from his hands. It formed a huge light sword that could cut through heaven and earth, flying through the air. Help Chu Yang. Lingxue and Feng Yuro also realized that something was wrong and attacked at the same time. But that white figure was really too fast. Just as they reacted, that white figure was already in front of Chu Yang. It let out a long roar and laughed loudly. Heaven-nourishing jade. It's mine. Bam! Chu Yang flew out without any strength to fight back. That person's palm was like a ravine, grabbing Chu Yang's clothes. With a tug, Chu Yang's clothes were torn to shreds. It seemed as if many things had fallen out of Chu Yang's clothes. That person used his hand to catch them. Without slowing down, he shot up into the sky. A blurry white figure flashed in the air and disappeared. A hearty laughter shook the heavens and disappeared into the distance. Two figures, one black and one white, chased after him from two different directions. They were the Dharma Supreme and Wu Juecheng. The two of them had been paying attention for a long time. When they saw such a situation, and the fact that the white-robed person was unfamiliar, there was no such person in their memories. The two of them chased after him at the same time. If they could get the heaven-nourishing jade back, it would be theirs. Immediately, the furious Buluqing and Lingxue chased after him with all their might. Puffed! Wah! Only then did Chu Yang fall into the snow. There was a sweet taste in his throat, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He lay on the snow trembling all over. His face was pale and bloodless. Feng Yuro landed beside him with a swoosh. She immediately took his pulse, and her expression relaxed. Thank goodness. I just wanted to snatch something. At this moment, a few figures landed at the same time. They looked at Chu Yang with complicated gazes. They were the supreme martial artist experts of the big clans. Chu Yang woke up and asked in a trembling voice. What happened? Where's my heaven-nourishing jade? Where's my storage ring? Feng Yuro sighed and said, Brother Bu and the others have already gone after him. I hope they can get it back. Chu Yang was dazed. Who is that person? This question. It was also the question that everyone was most puzzled about. Who is that person? Judging from his speed just now, he was much faster than them. At the very least, he was also a supreme martial artist expert. What are you all doing here? Feng Yuro's face turned cold, looking at the dozens of 7th-grade supreme martial artists of the big clans around her. Her eyebrows gradually raised. She was already anxious, and now this happened. Seeing these people again, she was really angry. Get lost. These people saw that Chu Yang's clothes were torn, and he was almost naked. Even the ring on his finger was snatched away. There was also a big scratch. It must have been left behind when the ring was snatched away. It was obvious. Now Chu Yang couldn't hide anything on his body. It looked like they had all been robbed. Since that was the case, everyone was relieved. How could they still be interested in staying here? And looking at Feng Yuro's face, they apologized one after another. In an instant, everyone left without a trace. All of them were gloating to the extreme. Who asked you to be so awesome? You deserved it. You were robbed. How satisfying, ha ha ha. The Valley Master and the High Priest hurried over. What's going on? Chu Yang said dejectedly. Robbed. The heaven-nourishing jade is gone. The Valley Master and the High Priest sighed deeply. A red shadow flashed, and Mo Qingwu anxiously squeezed in. Chu Yang, you does it hurt? The little girl's face was full of worry. She moved closer to Chu Yang and inquired about his well-being. At this moment, she was actually infinitely gentle. It's okay. As long as you're fine. The heaven-nourishing jade is nothing, it's okay. She didn't sound like Chu Yang was older than her. Instead, it sounded like she was much older than Chu Yang. Chu Yang smiled bitterly and held her little hand. I'm fine. As long as you're fine, Mo Qingwu said gently. In my heart, the heaven-nourishing jade can't even compare to a strand of your hair. As she said, she smiled easily. In her smile, there was too much comfort and a calming power. Feng Yuro looked at Mo Qingwu. She sighed in her heart. This girl may be young, but this kind of understanding, this kind of consideration, this kind of devotion. Qianqian's identity is a little awkward. I'm afraid I really can't compete with her for anything. Bu Luqing and Yu Lingxue gave chase together. Bu Liuqing's cultivation was high. Riding on the sword light, he left Yu Lingxue behind almost as soon as he started. But Yu Lingxue had always been fast. He actually followed behind and caught up quickly. Both of them were furious. It was too embarrassing. 3 peak-level supreme martial artists were guarding here, and someone actually robbed them right in front of them. This made both of them feel ashamed. But there was also a deep doubt in their hearts. Who exactly is this person? This person's cultivation is a little too scary. They rushed hundreds of miles in one breath. There was no trace left in front of them. Bu Luqing and Yu Lingxue stopped in their tracks. They couldn't catch up. A deep anger rose from their hearts. Both of them were livid and didn't speak. In front of them, 2 figures returned empty-handed. Seeing Bu Luqing and Yu Lingxue here, they seemed to pause for a moment, and then came over. Dharma Supreme! Bu Luqing shouted. You did it! The extremely aggrieved supreme martial artist Bu was obviously trying to vent his anger on the Dharma Supreme. As if he couldn't catch the rabbit and cook the dog. The one coming over was the Dharma Supreme. Beside him, there was a man in white. His robe was wide and his face couldn't be seen clearly. He was slightly behind the Dharma Supreme. He gave off a feeling that this person's status was lower than the Dharma Supreme's. To be continued. Chapter 1100. The Dharma Supreme smiled bitterly. If I really did it, it's understandable that Brother Bu wants to vent his anger on me. The problem is I didn't do it. And I am also chasing after that person. Bu Luqing saw that the Dharma Supreme was willing to put aside his pride to explain. So he was embarrassed to deliberately slander him. Because Bu Luqing had clearly seen the Dharma Supreme, and this person in white chasing after him. He asked sullenly, Who is this person? I didn't see clearly. The Dharma Supreme said solemnly. The only thing I can be sure of is that this person's cultivation is definitely not below yours and mine. And his speed is even faster than yours and mine. Bu Luqing said angrily. Nonsense. If he was not as fast as us, he would have been caught by you long ago. If he was not fast enough, we would have caught up with him long ago. You have been the Dharma Supreme for more than 10,000 years. Are you so used to talking nonsense? The Dharma Supreme was not angry. Brother Bu, you know that I am telling the truth. I am asking you, who is this person? Bu Luqing asked angrily. I don't know. The Dharma Supreme shook his head. You don't know? Buluqing and Yulingxue were shocked. The most powerful intelligence network in the world was in the hands of the Dharma Supreme. There was even information about every martial king in it. The law enforcement officer's database was cleared every 3 days. If there were any major changes, it would be reported to the Dharma Supreme immediately. All the information about supreme martial artists and above were cleared once a day and reported to the Dharma Supreme immediately. If even the Dharma Supreme did not know this person's background, then it was really mysterious. In the heavens there should not be such a person. The Dharma Supreme took a breath. In short, such a person should not exist. This is the most strange thing. Yes. This time, even Buluqing nodded repeatedly. In this world, the so-called reclusive experts and peerless experts, who could shock the world with a single move, did not exist. Because when a person practiced martial arts, he would have to cultivate. After cultivating for a period of time, he would need to improve through battles, regardless of technique. It was still a matter of comprehension. What one could comprehend in a life and death battle would always be much more than what one could comprehend alone. It could not be compared at all. The higher the level, the more so. Cultivating behind closed doors would never make one an expert. Not to mention becoming an expert like Buluqing. Therefore, as long as one was an expert, he would definitely be experienced in battles. This was the reason why martial artists broke the rules. But, as long as this person had appeared on the continent, it would be impossible for him to escape. After the battle, the enforcers would have his information. Now the Dharma Supreme said that there was absolutely no such thing. That meant the identity of this person. It must be fake. Even if it's fake, it must be an expert. Buluqing said coldly. Only law enforcers and big clans have such experts. This sentence, the Dharma Supreme did not refute. He was also doubting this possibility. If it was someone from a big clan or a law enforcement officer. Then to the Dharma Supreme, this matter was even more important than Chu Yang. Because this meant that in a certain aspect, he had already lost control. It's possible. The Dharma Supreme nodded indifferently. Buluqing stared at him for a long while before he finally said in a deep voice, Dharma Supreme, you are very weak today. Why do you keep agreeing with me? The Dharma Supreme heaved a long sigh. Shaking his head, he smiled bitterly and said, We were once brothers and good friends, but in these few days, we will immediately become mortal enemies. My heart is melancholy. I don't want to argue with people. His gaze was very complicated as he looked at Yulingxue, who was standing silently at one side, and said, Brother Yu, there are a few words that I would like to talk to you about. Yulingxue also felt a little depressed and said, That's right, I also want to talk to you. Buluqing's eyes flashed and he said indifferently, Dharma Supreme, what can't be said here? Don't force me to reveal your biggest secret. The Dharma Supreme smiled indifferently. If Brother Bu wants to reveal it, why wait until today? Brother Yu and I have been friends for more than 10,000 years. Don't tell me that before the battle of life and death, even the right to talk must be monitored by you? This sentence was said plainly, but the words were sharp. Buluqing did not give in and said, But your conversation must be within my sight. Only he knew that the Dharma Supreme now was not Dongfang Badeo. It was a soul that vowed to take revenge. He was afraid that Yulingxue would be fooled, so he insisted. The Dharma Supreme smiled bitterly and said, All right. Then he turned to Yulingxue and said, Brother Yu, come over here with me. He took the lead and walked to one side. After drifting a few hundred feet he stopped. Yulingxue's white clothes fluttered as he followed behind at a moderate pace. His brows were tightly knitted, and his expression was deep and complicated. Snow filled the sky. At this moment, it was already difficult to see beyond 10 feet. After a few hundred feet, there was no one at all. But his divine cognition could still lock on. Buluqing snorted. The Dharma Supreme was obviously using a trick. Under normal circumstances, a few hundred feet would naturally be within his sight. But in such heavy snow, how could he see? That man in white walked forward and smiled indifferently. Brother Bu, let's talk? Buluqing frowned and laughed coldly. You are not the Dharma Supreme's assistant, are you? The man in white laughed and said with interest, Why do you think so? Baluching narrowed his eyes. Wu Juecheng, don't play tricks in front of me. If you want to fight, I will keep you company. Even if you don't want to fight, I will still look for you to fight. The man in white was Wu Juecheng. He was surprised that Baluching actually recognized him. He laughed and said, Supreme Martial Artist Bu's temper is indeed as rumored. Very clever, to actually be able to detect my aura? Baluching took a deep breath and said, I didn't detect your aura when you hit it. However, you hit it too well. I, Baluching, don't have much wisdom, but I have a heart of the sword. Heart of the sword. Wu Juecheng repeated and smiled suavely. Brother Bu, after the Dharma Supreme nourishes the heavens, I will have a taste of your heart of the sword. Baluching smiled coldly. Teach me when the time comes. Wu Juecheng narrowed his eyes and said, According to the time, Ning Tianya should have reached Tianji City by now. Why isn't he here yet? Baluching held his breath and looked at Wu Juecheng sharply. What do you mean? Wu Juecheng said indifferently. The Dharma Supreme has gone to invite the Moon Breeze couple for a battle. After the Dharma Supreme nourishes the heavens, we will settle all our grievances. Brother Bu, a chance encounter is better than an invitation. Why don't we settle our karma then? He smiled slightly. Karma with Ning Tianya. Baluching laughed viciously and said word by word. What about Ning Tianya? Wu Juecheng said indifferently. After the Dharma Supreme nourishes the heavens, you will know. The sword intent on Baluching's body surged and danced in the air. His gaze also turned into a long sword. Wu Juecheng, fight with me now. Wu Juecheng shook his head. It's not the time yet. When the time comes, we will settle all our grievances together. Let me see what capabilities this sword supremacy, who is ranked number 1 in the world, has to be called number 1 in the world. Baluching nodded slowly and said, You will see. You will see. I also want you to know that the names of Chun Feng and Lu Yun are not enough to scare people. Wu Juecheng's gaze also became sharp. Is that so? The tribulation of the past is even less of a scare. Baluching looked at him coldly and said, Brother Wu, actually, what I despise the most is those who ride on the coattails of their ancestors to act like tyrants and be complacent. Wu Juecheng said indifferently, Is that so? Baluching nodded vigorously. Yes, back then, the morning breeze blew in the universe, and the clouds drifted in the outer heavens. How impressive was that? That was really sweeping through the heavens and dominating the world. No one dared to look directly at it. But tens of thousands of years later, everything has already changed. If his grandson is still using these 2 sentences to run rampant in the martial world, tell me, wouldn't that be very embarrassing? Wouldn't that be a huge joke? Right. A name that has decayed for tens of thousands of years. Brother Wu, tell me, what's the point of still shouting about it? Damn it, isn't this digging a grave? Wu Juecheng panted heavily and clenched his fists tightly. His voice was as cold as the underground wind. Brother Bu, 3 days later, you will see the power of these 2 sentences. Baluching laughed coldly. This I can't deny it. I will take on the power of Chun Feng and Lu Yun head on. But I'm worried. I might not be able to see Wu Juecheng's power. Wu Juecheng stared at him, the veins on his temples pulsing. He said word by word, Brother Bu, you will see it. 3 days later is not too late. In these 3 days, Brother Bu, you have to conserve your energy. When the time comes, Chun Feng and Lu Yun will have no descendants. Baluching pressed on. Don't be called Wu Juecheng anymore. Change your name to Wu Jueho. Swoosh. Wu Juecheng's whip flew up violently. He couldn't hold it in any longer, and was about to strike. Baluching had been waiting for this moment. He let out a long howl. Tribulation calming force. Nothing more. Descendant of Chun Feng. Nothing more. Wu Juecheng. Looks like you also joined forces with others when you fought Ning Tianya, right? I'm really not looking down on you. With your little cultivation and self-restraint, even I look down on you, let alone injuring Ning Tianya? Ha ha ha. You've been tricked by the tribulation sword master your whole life. Sure enough, you've learned some despicable and shameless ways. Wu Juecheng held the whip with one hand, and the braid with the other. His breathing became more and more rapid. He was still forcefully suppressing the anger that was about to erupt. Buluqing, 3 days later, you will pay the price. With a flash of sword light, Buluqing unsheathed his sword and pointed it at Wu Jueqing. He laughed loudly. Wu Jueqing, why wait for 3 days? Come. Grandpa will send you on your way. Lest your ancestors and your tribulation brothers wait too long. Buluqing wasn't such a sharp person, but the moment he heard that Ning Tianya was in danger, he exploded. No matter what, he had to vent his anger. Wu Jueqing raised his head and roared. 3 days later, I will definitely kill you. Suddenly, there was a thunderous sound. Wu Jueqing's white figure disappeared in the wind and snow. For the sake of the grand plan 3 days later, Wu Jueqing chose to tolerate it. But he couldn't tolerate it any longer. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Originally, he was also trying to provoke Buluqing into holding back for the final battle 3 days later. Although he was so angry now, he had already achieved his goal. A little impatience spoils great plans. He retreated. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.